remove your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property being addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decision. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. This morning, we will be hearing items 3 through 5 on our docket. And Ms. Carnegie, please affirm the assessor and the applicant's testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Nathan Kupfer.
You affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro, please state your full name.
Marcelo Navarro.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Story, please state your full name.
Jared Story.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the first item on our docket this morning is 194 Broadway. I'm just confirming that we are just looking at assessed value this morning on this property, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Kupfer, please proceed when you're ready.
This is file number 23-313, roll number 1209280800. Street address is 194 Broadway, and the owner and of course the building is known as the Manitoba Club. This is right on the corner of Broadway and Fort, so we are right in the downtown. We have this classified as a banquet meeting hall, which means that this property is being evaluated using cost. The zoning for the property is M, multiple use. The effective age, as you're showing 2 different years here. 1985 is the effective age being applied to the main building. And then there's a small addition with an age of 2008 as well. That's why we're showing 2 different years. The land area for the property is 20,163 square feet, with a leasable area of 42,696 square feet. The construction class on file here we have as a Class D wood or steel framed exterior building. To my knowledge, that isn't correct. I haven't inspected this property recently, but I have been inside of it. I don't believe this is a Class D building. I would almost certainly call this a Class C building. So in going over the property, there were some inaccuracies that I was able to identify, and I'll be able to iron out for you this morning. But nevertheless, we do have a total 2024 assessed value of $3,015,000 that I'm going to be recommending be confirmed today. Page 3 of my brief shows the 2 different building components. As I was mentioning earlier, we do have a small addition on file for this property that was constructed in 2008. This is a stairwell and elevator addition of only 344 square feet. The rest of the building is being with that 1985 effective year. Because they have different effective years, they're being depreciated separately and differently within our system here. So generally speaking, these types of buildings will max out at around 80% depreciation figure once they've exceeded their economic life. This property is a heritage property. So what that means is beyond the typical depreciation that we would apply, we apply further obsolescence, what it's known as. So that's why our depreciation percentage is all the way up at 90% for this building. So the replacement cost new, as you can see on my page 3 for the main building, is just under $6 million with 90% depreciation. We were leaving you with $628,000 of building value. And then next to that for the addition, we have $174,000 building value. Page 4 of my brief has land sale comparables. I've done my best to pull comparables from all over the downtown, showing some of our higher ones and some of our lower ones. Again, the subject property is Zone M, multi-use, and is about 20,000 square feet. So I looked at those types of properties for your best comparables. Page 5 has a breakdown of the land value, again, showing it's all Class 60T. The net area is just over 20,000 square feet, which equates to a net rate of just under $110 a foot, for a total land valuation of $2,213,000. Page 6 summarizes this cost valuation for you. So again, total building value, again, this is depreciated replacement cost, $802,000. Total land value, $2,213,000. That's providing us with our total 2024 assessment. Page 7 of my brief applies to Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. Page 8 of my brief onwards includes the income and expense mailer that is submitted. So the Manitoba Club submits that they are fully owner occupied and they don't submit any income to us. However, they have submitted some expenses. So there's no issues here with non-cooperation, but it's simply to state that we don't have an income stream to base this evaluation off of. One of the things I noticed when I was reviewing this property, so we have 3 different classifications for effectively what you could call this type of building. So on page 11, I've included for you a definition of the fraternal building classification. And then beyond that, page 13 and 14 is a Marshall and Swift workup using the Class C building classification, which, like I said, this is a masonry building, not a wood frame building. So that's how we should be classifying this. And then I've included, I'll just say now, 3 workups, all with Class C, one using the fraternal building building classification, one using the country club building classification. Again, I've included the definitions as well. And then one using the clubhouse designation. So clubhouse is what we're currently calling it in our model. This is the lowest of the 3 classifications. Again, I'm not sure why this was chosen, but we're calling it a Class D clubhouse, which is why my statement about our current assessed modeled value being low, I feel is accurate. I've included a correct Marshall and Swift workup using the Class C masonry building type, pages 21 and 22. We have a depreciated cost being produced here for the property of $1,937,651. And then, like I'm saying, because this is a heritage building, we would apply a 50% obsolescence to that. So if we were to model this fresh and correctly, in my opinion, we'd be looking at a building value that would be $1,937,651 times 0.5. You would be looking at about a $968,000 building value. Like I said, we have it currently modeled just over $800,000. So we'll look at making those adjustments going forward, but this is where we're at for the appeal now. And then my final page in my brief, I have included for your reference an income stream for this property. So this is roughly what the building value would look like. Standard OFS parameters, roughly $14 a foot, 6.25 cap rates. We'd be pushing an approximate $8 million market value. So Like I said at the beginning, I'm going to recommend this 2024 assessment be confirmed, and I am open to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer, Mr. Navarro, Mr. Story. Any questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I have a few questions. So, Mr. Kupfer, ultimately, we don't dispute that this is indeed a brick building. It's pretty, it's apparent. Can we agree, just I suppose for the sake of expediency, that our costing on the building is indeed coming out a touch higher than the city's costing for the purpose of this report today, on the building only?
What number do you have for your building?
810.
That would be very slightly higher. Yes, we have 802.
Okay, so Madam Chair, if I may, I've included all of our costing information. I don't disagree with some of the comments. Well, the comments regarding the depreciation, capturing the heritage, that's fine. We have indeed used the country club parameters. We don't believe that the clubhouse is appropriate, and the fraternal building is also somewhat different as well. That would be something like a Masonic temple or some such thing. So ultimately, for the sake of expediency, if the board is well, I'll continue on with the land questions with the understanding that our building value is not typically going to be in dispute since our
Okay.
is high.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Kupfer, you mentioned the heritage designation on the property. So ultimately, does that in any way factor into what we'll call the theoretical land value that needs to be applied as part of the cost methodology for our exercise today?
To my knowledge, this is being applied, that obsolescence due to the heritage status only to the building. Nothing from that is being applied in our model to the land. Right.
Okay, but ultimately, based on the fact that this is a protected building, there would be no way, and it is, and I did inspect the property, it is built up right to the property line, correct?
Relatively, I'm not sure on what the clearance is, how many feet you have to the property line.
Okay, and can we agree that it does indeed abut a heritage provincial park in the Upper Fort Garry Park? That's the adjacent parcel, correct?
I'm not clear on the designation status of the abutting parcels. Manitoba Club.
Okay, so the city is not aware then in the creation of this assessment that the Manitoba Club is indeed neighboring the Upper Fort Garry.
It's not about awareness. I'm saying that wouldn't be factored into a CAMA assessment.
So it's not considered. That's fine. But can we agree that now we have two potential impediments? One being that the property upon which the land sits is not developable unless there were some sort of total catastrophic loss of the main holding. And further to that, even if that land was developable, any development would have to be sensitive, let's say, to the nature of the adjacent parcel, which of course is a national heritage site and provincial park.
It would be cognizant of whatever stipulations are related to that heritage designation status, which I'm not clear what they are exactly. Is it
okay? And in the past, are you aware that there was a proposal in with the city of Winnipeg to develop the old gas station once it was gone, and there was substantial pushback from interested heritage groups in order to not develop that site, but rather to create the group as the Friends of the Upper Fort Garry, and they indeed created this interpretive center in order to protect that heritage site. Are you aware of that?
No, was that included in your brief?
No, that's just sort of, well, I did include some rebuttal not rebuttal, I suppose, but in chief evidence, I did support the bill that was passed creating the park, but it's sort of a known thing in the city that there was a great deal of pushback to the development of that adjacent parcel. Regardless, I'd like to talk very quickly about these land sale comps. Now, were these comps chosen specifically for this exercise today, for this subject?
Yes.
Okay. And just to be clear, and we've used a number of these as well, but these have not been, is the land rate modeled, I suppose is my first question as we talk about this?
Yes,
Okay, so there's been no downward adjustment to capture these two very, very specific issues with this property. Is that a fair comment? It's just been applied as the model outputted the land rate. Is that fair?
these are land sale comparables, not land model comparables. So these aren't
Okay.
coming from our model.
And can we agree that the value of land or what a developer might be willing to pay for land is based on its capacity in the future to generate income? Is that a fair comment?
It is, and again, this isn't being evaluated as an income generating property. And for your reference, I've included an income stream as the last page of my brief, so you can see how this property should be evaluated based on a fair income stream.
Right, but that's okay. But hold on. Well, I don't want to jump around too much, Madam Chair. But Mr. Cupper, you mentioned it, but that last page you've included the parameters, I think, for a suburban office.
That's correct.
And the Manitoba Club is let's say it's best described as a hospitality property, correct? It's not an office.
That's correct.
Okay, so that would not be germane to our discussion today, just so we're very clear. In terms of these comps, and I appreciate that we haven't used an income approach, but in terms of the sale price per square foot, and based on what a developer might be willing to pay for a piece of property, I think you've agreed with me, correct me if I'm wrong, that sale price per square foot is typically based on the development capacity of that parcel, correct?
That's correct, which generally corresponds to the zoning, which in this case is M multiple use.
Right, okay, so I'll just go through them very quickly, Madam Chair. 310 Donald, now that's our client, that's the Alt Hotel, which is a 20 or 21 story hotel, as well as the Stantec building, as well as the retail and restaurants on the main floor, and it's across from the arena, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and 311 Hargrave, that's the Glass House condos. That's a high rise. That was the Norland building, but that purchase references the construction of Glass House. That's a 200 suite, 21 floor condominium building, correct?
That's right, with the same zoning as the subject property.
Okay, and in terms of, 245 Graham, that's a large parking lot that has provincial parking income, and that was to be the site of the Sky City development, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and the Assiniboine, that was the D block. Now it's called something on the water, I forget, but it is indeed on the river, and that's 24 stories. So these are all high rises, correct?
Many of them are, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now in terms of, and then 641 William, I'm going to ask that we not regard as Madam Chair. Mr. Cuff, are you aware that 641 William was indeed purchased with 653 William? And that's a parkade that's very close to the Health Sciences Center, and it was purchased with the restaurant building. Are you aware of that? Did you find that in your research?
No, is that included in your brief?
No, I'm submitting it to you verbally. We just found it in my research yesterday evening. I discovered that, so I'm submitting it verbally. 242 Hargrave, of course, is True North Square, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And 170 Bannatyne is the parking lot that is associated with 433 Main Street, correct?
I'm not sure on that.
Okay. And 127 Bannatyne, again, that's in the exchange. That's our client as well. And that was purchased with surface parking income, with the view to developing a 10 or 11 story mixed use property. Are you aware of that?
No, was that included in your brief?
No, but these are your comps, so I'm presuming that you would have some background on them. But if you don't,
You're saying they were intending to develop something here. I don't know how I would know that if it was your client.
well, there's the present physical condition of this site, Mr. Cupfer, is that it's being developed. Currently, it's been in the news, but the present physical condition is indeed that there's development in the ground. So presumably one would know that, but if you don't, that's okay. And then the last one, that's the convention center, correct?
370 York?
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. And the one that I didn't mention here, and I've used a number of these as well, but we've used adjustments. Would you agree with me then that 155 Gary, though it doesn't have any impediment to development, as our subject does, would likely be your best comp? Is that a fair comment?
No, I didn't think that's a fair comment.
Okay, which, in your opinion then, which comp would be your best land comp, based on our subject?
I think it's a poor exercise to try and seek out one land comp as your best comp. That's why I generally try and submit a sample size, different factors, and I believe our sample size more than supports our land value.
Okay, but can we agree though, that we're going to distort that number upward if we don't make adjustments for the potential impediments on development on our subject, and if we're including sites where the capacity to develop skyscrapers is apparent? Don't you think that would skew your sample median and average upward?
Well, those properties that you identified sold for almost double the land value that we have assessed here. So no, I don't think that's a fair argument.
Okay, but should they even be in the conversation, I suppose, is the larger question.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I think those are my questions on land. Mr. Barr, do you have any questions of the assessors? Information?
I do. Mr. Cuthbert, I noted several properties here that are in the sports, hospitality, and entertainment district. Are you aware of this area?
Am I aware of the downtown Winnipeg?
Do you know what the sports, hospitality, and entertainment district is?
I am familiar with that term.
You are?
Yes.
Okay.
The shed? Yes.
Okay, and you're also familiar with the fact that these properties are close to, say, the MTS Center, the Bell MTS, whatever they call it today, and on Portage Avenue in those areas, correct?
Some of my comparables are on Portage Avenue, correct?
So on Portage Avenue, you see some of the, what we would call taller buildings, correct?
There are many tall buildings on Broadway as well, including the building next door to this one. So
Okay.
yes, there are some tall buildings on Portage. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So the argument that we're trying to make here is that the allowable density in this area is quite high compared to our area, is it not?
Density?
Basically, how many units of habitable space or leasable area you can commit to an area, a land area.
I have no comment on that. Okay.
So in terms of the subject property, I think Mr. Story hit on this also. You can observe that it is beside a provincial park, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And also, are there any large, tall buildings near this property?
Yes.
Okay, on Broadway?
Right next to the Fort Garry Hotel, is it not?
I believe the Fort Garry Hotel was built sometime around 1910.
Right. Wasn't the question, are there any tall buildings near this building?
Okay. Any newer ones that have been built in the past, say, 20 years?
I didn't research that for this appeal, Marcelo.
Okay. Well, you're aware that there is a downtown zoning policy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, that zoning policy came into effect around 2006. Would properties now have to adhere to that zoning policy?
I can't comment on how the specific property would be seen. Like you said, it's a fairly unique property.
Would there be any setbacks involved in placing a property if this property was vacant and unencumbered?
The same setbacks that would be required for any other property in this area, as far as I know, potentially further ones from the park as you've identified on one side.
Yeah, and some of the larger sites that you've had in your comparisons, I'm not sure if Mr. Story touched upon this, but the larger sites would be more akin to larger developments, correct? If something were to go in there.
Larger sites can facilitate larger developments, that's correct.
I believe that's all.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Cupper. Those are our questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Merritt, do you have any questions for Mr. Kupfer?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairperson. Mr. Kupfer, you've concluded value for the subject property on the cost approach, but also you had mentioned that you did do an income approach that I'm sort of looking at, and that value, if you factor in, your income stream, and came out to approximately $8 million. And with the cost, including the land, it comes to $3 million. So I'm just wondering why, I guess in comparison, using the two approaches, why you go with the cost approach compared to the income approach for the property. I know it's a heritage building, so that might be part of it, but maybe you can just enlighten us just a little.
That's a fair question, and the short answer, as you touched on, I think there is equity. It's due to the classification of the property. It gets put on cost within our model because it's a banquet/meeting hall, and all of them get done on cost, even though it is not producing, obviously, the highest value possible for this property.
Yeah. Just offhand, the leasable area is 42,000 some odd thousand square feet. Does that include the basement, or is the basement separate? Do you know offhand?
I believe it does not include the basement, or at least the majority of it, as we have a gross floor area showing as 56. We probably have another 13,000 square feet in the basement.
All right. I thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. Mr. Palatrulio, do you have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Susser, could you comment on the list of sales that you've used for the land? Is this an exhaustive list of downtown sales, or have you just chosen the larger sales that were available?
So I cut out some of the very high end and very low end in terms of size here. So anything that was over 100,000 square feet, I think, got kicked, and anything that was under 5,000 square feet got kicked. Like I said, our subjects at about 20,000, so I was trying to bracket that about as best as I could. And beyond that, I was just targeting a range within our downtown, somewhat similar locations to the subject.
And I see that the sales range anywhere from 2012 all the way up to 2019. That's the nature of the beast with when it comes to sales in downtown, I'm guessing.
It is, and as you can see, we don't time adjust any of these sales, so it's important to keep in mind that older sales, generally a bit outdated, you could expect them to sell at a higher rate per foot, of course, given our 2021 reference date today.
And again, these are sales that are for vacant land at the time.
Yes, sir.
Those are my questions.
Thank you. You may have touched on this, Mr. Kupfer, and I'm just in answering some of the questions, I just want to clarify. So I know that your land sale comps were pulled from most recent sales that you felt were relevant. In terms of the actual rate that you applied to the subject property, was that done through the model, or did you do that?
This was 100% applied through the model. It's $109
Okay.
and 76 cents.
All right, thank you. And just also in terms of the cost approach versus the income approach, so you did clarify with Mr. Merritt that it was the classification of the type of business that is being conducted on the property. And so the heritage aspect of the property has no bearing on whether you do costs or income. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. So Mr. Navarro, Mr. Story, please proceed when you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And if I may just address something very quickly, just so while it's fresh in all of our minds, the assessor's cost approach, and I mentioned this in my examination of the evidence, it is indeed using the model parameters of a suburban office. The Manitoba Club is in no way, shape, or form a suburban office. It is a meeting and banquet hall. It's a hospitality facility with restaurant area and games rooms and that sort of thing. And I will point out that the rent per square foot is completely inappropriate. The leasable area is not appropriate. I visited this property. I toured the entire property. The amount of usable space for a property that's over 100 years old, we would see a much higher vacancy rate, and that cap rate, particularly at the reference date, as we all can imagine, in April 1 of 2021, anyone operating in the hospitality / restaurant space was hit particularly hard. So a 6.25 cap rate that would typically be applied to a suburban office, it has no bearing here. So I'm not sure why it's included, but I just want to make sure that it's not skewing anything and that we do not disregard it. So ultimately, as I mentioned, for the purpose of this exercise, I did visit the property. We did notice, as Mr. Cuffer has rightly pointed out, that there was a misclassification of Class D. It should indeed be Class C. We have used the country club application because it is on the higher end, without regard for the fact that this indeed is a property that was in the hospitality sector in downtown Winnipeg at April 1 of 2021. Unfortunately, the cost approach does not have the ability, let's say, to capture those market factors. Now, I will not belabor my comments on the value of the building. We are indeed a touch higher than the assessment. So this effectively, Madam Chair, becomes a land dispute. We are concerned with the rate that's been applied by the assessor. As I've mentioned, we have to be considerate of the fact that there's a heritage building on this land. There is no excess land whatsoever. The only way that this land is developable would be if there was a loss of the main holding, which is obviously heritage protected. Further complicating matters of development potential is the fact, and I can't stress this enough, that we are abutting what I will say is one of the most historically significant spaces in Western Canadian history. We are right next to Upper Fort Garry. So in terms of what may be developed there, we have to be cognizant that development applications in the past to build apartments have been rejected. And that was in 2006. We can only assume that the appetite for any sort of development that would negatively impact or not consider the nature of Upper Fort Garry would not likely be met. Would likely be met with some pushback from the Heritage Lobby and perhaps even the city itself. So we have to be considerate when we look at these sales. So I've included a range of sales for you on page 15, and I've summarized each below my chart. Many of these are similar to the sales. There are only a finite amount of sales in the relevant period, and the assessor is drawn on the same pool that we have. I believe he's used 14 and we've used 10. And they're very similar. Now, our average, based on what was submitted, comes to 105.74. Our median is 98.51. I will ask that 44 Hargrave be disregarded in both my evidence and in the assessors. In reviewing that sale, we did recognize that it was a multi-role sale and that it was atypical. So we're not putting any weight on that. It's quite high. But if you do remove that from our chart, our average becomes 101.68 with a median of 98. So ultimately, about $100 per square foot for lands that are developable in the downtown, that are superior, that have greater capacity for density, as Mr. Navarro quite rightly pointed out, that are not encumbered by the heritage building designation or the designation of the building sitting atop the land, or the specific nature of the heritage site / provincial park that directly abuts the subject. So all this to say that we've used a rate of $85 per square foot, and we feel this is a very, very fair, as we've adjusted our call it our average down by about 15% in order to capture the very, very specific nature of this particular parcel. Again, I visited the site, I walked through it, I've included all of our photos. Mr. Navarro is our cost expert, and he's provided his workup, but ultimately, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a land dispute. So we are suggesting that the land, based on our site-specific analysis, it's not model, this is our opinion based on our research for the purpose of this exercise, that the land value ought not to exceed $1,714,000. Taken together with our slightly higher building rate of $810,000, we are respectfully submitting that the value for the Manitoba Club ought not to exceed $2,524,000. And I think I will leave it there, Madam Chair, and I'm open to your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kupfer, any questions?
I do. Thank you for whomever is best able to answer. I'm looking at your cost reports, beginning on page 18. I think I heard you say you agree with me that this is a Class C building, and I'm showing this cost report was done based on a Class D wood or steel frame. Is that correct?
The report was based on the declassification. So in Marshall Swift, you'll note if we turn to those pages where we see the costing.
Mr. Navarro?
We can go to page 18. Okay. Okay. So I know that you've labeled it as wood frame. That is the category that you see in the property specifications under the city of Winnipeg. Okay. That is not the specifications under Marshall Swift. So in Marshall Swift, Class D actually can include wood or steel frame structures. Okay. And you can see it right there in the occupancy of the country club where it says wood or steel framed exterior walls. So you're correct that this is not a wood frame structure. It's not a steel frame structure. A masonry structure, I think, is stretching it. It is a brick building. And we want to maybe distinguish between, say, masonry structures, where you see, for example, apartment buildings that are built from masonry design, generally having some type of reinforcement in them. I'm not sure that this is that. This is a brick building, okay? It's a brick building. It may have some wooden support because at that time, maybe steel wasn't very common, but I would say that nobody has really captured it well. However, getting back to the original point in terms of the construction type, and I want to be quite clear about this, when we're talking about the Class D in Marshall Swift, it's not just including wood frame, it is also including steel structures.
And you agree with me that this is a brick structure, not a wood or steel frame structure, correct?
I would agree with you that it is a brick structure.
Okay. And using Marshall and Swift, a brick structure is classified using the C classification, correct?
I'm not entirely sure, but if we were to cost out a masonry building, it would probably come out higher. And we would also take into consideration other forms of depreciation on it, things like that. So hypothetically, yes, it would come out higher. However, again, I say that there's a difference between modern masonry buildings and say 100-year-old brick building.
The permit, the addition permit from 2007, I believe is for a staircase and elevator. I read it as, is that correct?
The permit?
Yeah, the addition that was put on around that time.
Well, yes, and Mr. Cupper, the addition was also to support the building because it was shearing. I think I have photos of that in my my evidence. But that's obviously with these older buildings, over 100 years old, stone foundation, there was some shearing going on. So part of that addition was in order to subtend the structure of the building. I don't have a photo here, but yes, you're correct. There was a small addition that was built, and it's a stairwell. I walked through it, and you can see the original wall was actually shearing from shifting to the original structure.
The permit also mentioned an elevator. Can you confirm that the building has an elevator?
It does, yeah, it has an elevator.
Okay. Does your Marshall and Swift workup include an elevator?
It does not.
Would you agree with me that adding an elevator would potentially increase your building value?
I'm not sure if it would increase the building value. It would certainly improve access to certain parts of it, but overall, I'm not sure what contribution it would add to it.
Okay. My last question was regarding just the top of page 17. You have a note saying the Marshall and Swift was used to calculate the building value, which after depreciation was estimated to be $263,821. Where is that?
That is a typo, Mr. Cupfer. I apologize. You can see our position right below that, but that is indeed a typo. That's my error.
Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Coulatruglou, do you have any questions?
Madam Chair. I guess that I'm looking at the sales for the land that you have put forward today, and just forgive me for scrolling back here for a moment. So you've used pretty much the same as what the city has used, maybe not as quite as many, but
Thanks.
you've used sales that were available in downtown Winnipeg.
Yes, you're quite correct. They're very similar to those that were presented by the assessor. Obviously, there are a finite amount of sales, so we've used we've curated this table for the purpose of this exercise. Yes,
Fair enough. And so you've come up with an average and a median, et cetera, and you've modified that slightly.
Yes.
But you then go one step further and you're suggesting that the board should look at a 15% reduction to the value of the land per square foot based on, and I'm not certain where that came from.
Yeah,
So
I can speak
if
to
you could answer
Absolutely.
where that.
Yeah.
I believe you were talking about the park being an influence, but
Absolutely. So
how did you come up with 15%?
yeah, so 15% is, and thank you for the question. You're absolutely right. It is discretionary, to be certain. It is our best judgment. However, we have to recognize that all of these sales have neither of the encumbrances, I would say, as our subject. I had mentioned, I believe in the first round of questioning that this land value is highly theoretical. There's no way to actually develop that land. There's no way to get to it, save for a massive loss of the main holding. And in that scenario, any development presumably would have to abide by the whatever would be permitted, whatever would be permissible to be built next to this very important historic site and heritage and national park. And then I did reference we're going back some time now, but many of us will remember in 2006 when there was a development plan or a request to develop the old gas station, and it was met with, well, it didn't go through, let's say. So we can only assume that the development potential or capacity for development for our subject land, even if it were developable, which it's not, would have substantial impediments that are not acting on these properties. So I think, frankly, 15% as a downward adjustment is quite reasonable. It may be more, but for the purpose of our assignment, I think it makes sense, and I think it's fair. But you're quite correct in pointing out that it is indeed discretionary, but based on the facts on hand.
I'm struggling with that a bit because of the fact that really, as you say, it is a discretionary number that you're plucking out of the air. And yet we don't know for fact. Obviously, it can't be, we're talking hypothetical here because the building exists. The building isn't, unless there's complete loss of the building, to which the building would probably want to rebuild, but
right,
whether they're allowed or not allowed, that part, again, to be determined.
Right.
And I'm kind of looking at it from the perspective of, does the land get affected by that in the meanwhile? And that's the difficulty that I'm struggling with.
I understand, and it is obviously a very unique situation because we don't have another provincial park in the downtown. So, but our best, I suppose, our best proxy is how to view this is the past, and in the past when development was proposed on that site, it was blocked, frankly. So
yeah, that was on the gas station right on the corner, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
If I could interject.
Please.
here.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So I've used this analogy a few times in terms of what a developer would look for in a site. And it kind of mirrors electricity. It follows the path of least resistance. So what you're looking for in a site is a site where you can build the highest amount of density with the least amount of impediments. And the reason we made that adjustment is that in comparison to those other properties that we're looking at in the comparisons on both sides, this property, the subject, has a fair amount of impediments. And in terms of density, we don't think density would be there simply because it is in a location where we're not talking about we're talking about what's surrounding it. So there are some historical sites that are surrounding it, and it's had a proven history of being rejected in terms of developments in the past. So as a developer, I would look at that site and I would say to myself, I'm going to have some problems developing this site, whether there's a building there or not.
Fair enough, but would it not be also true that if there was a total loss, if the Manitoba Club ceased to exist, it got burned down to the ground, they are stopped from rebuilding a building, and the park wants to take that space over, would the park not be paying market value for the land at the end of the day to acquire that land? So what difference would it mean?
Well, that's
If
fair.
it's the park buying it or if it's Hotel Fort Garry buying
Yeah,
it?
but the market, I suppose, and I think you
Right?
identified the two people who would be most
Exactly.
likely, right? But that's a very small market, and
But it is the market.
Very true. But the other thing that I want to point out, and I want to mention this, both the assessor and Altus have used 155 Gary. That's an unencumbered property. It's very close. It's very close in terms of land size, and that's at 84.78 a foot. So even if you don't necessarily agree with our 15% adjustment, I don't think it's necessarily appropriate to use some of these properties where a high-rise development is supported, but we do have that sale at 8478, and that would also support our 85. And the city has used that comp as well. So
Yeah,
I
no,
suppose,
and I appreciate what you're saying, though the only one caveat I would add to that is that it is a 2015 sale. So it's a little bit, a little older. And I know there aren't many sales to go from, so I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt.
Thank you. I just have one observation, I guess. Mr. Story, can you tell us when this historical building, or when the building was put on the historical list? Do you know?
Yeah, it was 2018. It was in the newspapers, and the owners were in opposition to it, but it was indeed in 2018.
Yeah. So they could be in opposition, but they have no choice, really, eh?
That seems to be the way things tend to go in the city. Yeah, they were well, and it's and I Mr. Mayor, you and I had a property yesterday where there's a heritage designation. So you've heard this one before, but I want to be very clear that Altus is not at all anti-heritage in any way, shape, or form. And I mentioned to you yesterday, in my personal and professional life, I've been an advocate for heritage, but we have to consider that heritage designations come at a much higher cost than there's a higher cost to carry those assets. It's to the benefit of many, but the costs are borne by few. So we support heritage designations. We think it's a good thing, but we understand when owners are not when they oppose having a caveat put on title, and when they oppose having to go through a separate permitting track through the city of Winnipeg, and it does amount to greater red tape and greater costs. So typically when properties are not at risk of falling into disrepair, the heritage building amounts to red tape. The heritage designation amounts to red tape. So they are certainly maintaining the property, but they were opposed to it for presumably those reasons, as I read in the media.
I thank you, sir. I have no further questions, but I'm chairperson.
Thank you. Okay, I just have one. You've been referring numerous times to 2006, I believe you said, and the proposed redevelopment of the gas station site at the corner of Broadway and Main. What exactly happened there? Did this go all the way to city planning and was rejected? Was it a proposal that the public was not in favor of? What exactly do you know that occurred there?
So you're stretching my memory a bit, but what I recall is there was a group that formed in opposition called the Friends of Upper Fort Garry. I believe it was led by a local historian who was then involved in the frankly world-class interpretive center that is there now. It's actually, I believe it has the distinction of being the largest piece of public art in Canada, if I'm not mistaken, the Long Wall. And they believe that, I mean, this is a very important, the fort is very important in terms of the history of the Red River Rebellion, the provisional government, the Manitoba effectively becoming Manitoba and then joining Confederation. So this is a historically substantial spot, and it was rightly identified as such by the heritage community and the group that formed as an interest group called the Friends of Upper Fort Garry. Now I could be wrong, but my recollection was that there was a development application put in. I know it was for an apartment. I don't remember the scale or how high it was, but I believe it went to. I'm not sure how many readings it went to, but there was certainly a development application that was rejected ultimately by property planning and development. I'm sure there's more details in there. It was a bit of a saga at the time, but I think that's the gist of it.
So you're submitting that the city actually rejected this proposal, not just that there were people some of the public who were in opposition.
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Mr. Kupfer, any desire for a summation?
Yes, please. I would like to touch on the fact that this is not a land-only issue. There aren't nearly as many unknowns as Altus has made it seem to be. Like I said, I have included the full Marshall and Swift workups using the correct Class C designation, including an elevator, which the building actually has. And I've shown you that the building should be valued objectively at about twice what we have it currently at. So that's why the agents are trying to make this a land-only issue. You could knock $800,000 off our land, and realistically, our $3 million building value would still be a fair one because our building is so drastically undervalued here. So I feel like that's worth pointing out. Regarding our land sales, I'd like to reiterate that none of these sales from the agent or our own are time adjusted. So saying that our best available sale is at around $84 a foot. Well, fair enough, but it's a 2015 sale, so I feel like that should be taken into account. Beyond all that, I do feel like the income stream that I provided is a fair reference because, again, despite the fact that we assess these the way we do on an equitable basis for our taxpayers, if you were to go to the market and you were looking at selling this property fresh, you would look at, as Mr. Navarro stated, the highest return you can possibly get on the property, not replicating the existing use. So that's why that was included. And I'd like to reiterate that I believe our 2024 assessment is a fair one and it should be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro, Mr. Story?
Yes, Madam Chair, just very quickly, this is a land appeal. Our value is coming in slightly higher than the assessors. In terms of the land sales that have been submitted here, I think it's become evident that the assessor has simply taken a huge cadre of sales, sometimes where with parcels where there was capacity to build skyscrapers, to build large-scale multi-residential on the river, and has not made any sort of nuanced adjustment for the fact that, and I can't stress this enough, we are in a heritage building that is next to a heritage site in a national, or a provincial park. We have to be cognizant of that. So, and just in terms of Mr. Kupfer's comment about the income approach that's been provided here, I can't stress enough that it is completely out of line with what we would expect to see from a property that deals with hospitality. There's under no circumstance is anyone who's visited this property or inspected it would say that it is a suburban office. That is a gross miscalculation and a misclassification. So again, if the building value is not in question, as our value is indeed higher, it does become a question of the land. And I appreciate the very good discussion we've had about it. But as we can see, I think ultimately we can walk away and say, well, this is a very unique piece of land, and Mr. Navarro said quite rightly, the developers do tend to follow the path of least resistance, and I don't think that this subject meets that criteria. So ultimately, I think our 15% downward adjustment is well supported. I think the sale in 2015 makes sense. We don't typically adjust for time adjustment for land sales if we're going to talk about equity and equitable treatment. So ultimately, if you don't believe that the 15% ought to be adjusted to our larger data set, then I would implore you to look at the sale that we both agree on at roughly $85 a foot, and I think that makes sense. I think I'll leave it there, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to the next property on the agenda.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you. You too. You got a breakdown. Yeah, I'm just going outside for a second. Just be waiting outside.
Okay.
I'm not going away.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Jen.
Okay, Ms. Carnegie, I think we do have the applicant. Yes, we do.
Yes.
Great.
Yes,
so-
we do. We have Mr. Gupta here.
Okay, thank you for joining us, Mr. Gupta. So the next item on the agenda is 250 Portage Avenue. So Ms. Carnegie, if you could swear in the applicant, please.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Rajiv Gupta.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can have-
Okay. Thank you. Yes, you can take a seat, Mr. Gupta. So I think you just saw how this works. What will happen is the city will present their proposal for your property. You will then have an opportunity to ask questions of the city assessor, and as will we, and then you can present your evidence. And the same thing will happen again. The assessor can ask you questions, as will we. Does that sound okay to you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So Mr. Kupfer, please proceed when you're ready.
This is file number 23-217. Roll number is 1209-3123-000. The street address is 250 Portage Avenue. So we're right on the corner of Portage and Gary, on the south side of Portage. This is a commercial office building built in 1965. The leasable area is 16,273 square feet, land area of 7,139 square feet. This is a 2024 appeal, but there was also a 2023 appeal. I apologize for not including that order here at the beginning. So we had an original modeled assessment for 2023 of $2,572,000, I believe. The Board of Revision reduced that to what you see here, $2,354,000. And that was based on, the wording is the city's workup with a 15% vacancy rate. So the board factored in a higher vacancy rates, but I believe kept the same other parameters in that decision. Page 2 of my brief shows our subject sale history, showing the last available sale is back from 2008 for $1 million. I haven't personally investigated this sale. Page 3 of my brief shows our OFS workup. We have the building broken down into a few different areas here. Previously, there used to be multi-tenants in the building, of course. We have some basements, leasable area, substandard basements. That's generally more of your storage area. Tends to see like a $3 to $4 foot rent. Like I said, the total leasable area set at 16,273 square feet, with a potential rent of $190,871. Gives you a weighted average of about $11.73. Everything here is model driven. Like I said, the only adjustments to my knowledge from the Board of Revision ruling was to this vacancy, where they bumped the 11% to 15%. Expenses at 3%, shortfall at $8. In this case, we're seeing a capitalization rate of 5.85. Which gives you an income stream of $2,572,000, but like I said, the board knocked that down to $2,354,000. Page 4 of my brief shows the income value summary. There's only one stream on this property, so it's pretty straightforward. Pages 5 and 6 are standard inserts here, our capitalization rate table, and the Municipal Act excerpts. Of course, this falls into the office category. It is a downtown office. We have it as a commercial office, but due to the size, the height, we classify them as suburban offices or OFSs. So that's why it gets that designation in our model. So this would likely fall into our OFS suburban AB categories here. You can see the various rates given by the different agencies. Page 7 through 9 of my brief includes some photos of the property. You'll probably recognize it. Like I said, it's right on Portage Avenue. Driven past it many times. And then page 10, beginning here, we have a sales listing that was included from Colliers. This is back from 2018. They've been trying to sell the building, or at least listed the building in multiple times. Mentions how the building is in the shed district. Has 2 levels, 14,474 square feet between those 2 levels. And I guess they were asking at the time 3.5 million. The following page, page 12, actually has a really good breakdown of the total areas for us. It shows the lower level, 1,382 square feet leased, 5,855 square feet storage, main level and upper level, both 7,237 square feet. For a total area of 21,711. and it's described as 2 stories with a functional lower level. After that, we have a 2020 sales listing. This one is from realtor.com. Again, to my knowledge, the property still didn't sell, but again, just more information, more photos. Again, showing the floor space is 21,711 square feet. Some interior photos, some exterior photos. You get a good idea of what we're looking at with the property here. Scrolling down, beginning on page 23 to the 2017 lease listing from Shindico. Again, more information on the property, has some asking rates, which again, they're just asking rates, of course. But on page 25, you can see they're asking for a net rent of $24 for the main floor and $15 for the second floor. Beginning on page 26, I believe here we have the relevant income and expense mailer, the 2020 income and expense mailer. I'm not providing us much information here, unfortunately. I believe this is because the building was mostly vacant at this time, so they didn't have a lot of tenants to report. Continue scrolling through that. We have some more income and expense information, some land titles information showing mortgage amounts that were taken out on the building. So again, you can see multiple mortgages have been taken out. Feel free to add those up if you'd like. Many of these were just pulled from the 2023 brief, which was previously submitted by our departments. Beginning all the way down on page 39, you finally have our rent comparables table. This is again a wide selection of OFS properties from all over the city. Again, we're dealing with a downtown OFS 2 stories high, and that average rate, I think I quoted you, was about $11.70 something cents. And then our last few pages here, beginning on page 41, this is prepared by another member of our department. This is a marketplace study of OFB type properties, showing general rental trends, and again, some more supporting information for that. And that's through to page 46. So that's the information I have on this property. Again, it's been heard already. It was heard in 2023, and it was reduced from 2.572 to 2.354. And that's the value that we're recommending be confirmed today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gupta, do you have any questions for Mr. Kupfer?
Honorable Chairperson and the board, I don't have questions. I made it as a presentation of reply to what SSR has submitted.
Okay, understood. So what we'll do is the panel will now ask Mr. Kupfer questions, and then we'll come to your presentation then. Okay, thank you. Mr. Merritt, any questions?
Thank you. Mr. Kupfer, you've done a exercise in regards to the income approach, and you've come to a value of say 2,572,000.
It was modeled, but yes.
Yeah, but yet you're still going with the 2,354,000.
That's right. To my knowledge, the board's decision was just a slight adjustment to the vacancy in consideration for some of the problems that the owner's been having getting tenants. So I didn't have any problem with that. I'm okay recommending the 2023 board decision.
Did you get a chance to visit the property at all?
I haven't personally, no.
Okay. Any parking to this building?
It's a good question. It's a bit of a unique shape, right? It's a long, skinny type property, and then it's is effectively surrounded by a large parking structure. So the property itself, I don't believe, has any parking on it, but the adjacent property is a parking structure.
Was this an old bank at its time? You know?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay. You had, I think you included some sort of note that at one point Colliers probably had the listing and it was listed at 3.5.
That's right. Yeah, beginning on my page 10 here, There's a Collier's listing. It does a pretty good job showing off the property. Lists the square footages per floor. And then, yeah, it has an offering price of 3.5, which obviously they didn't end up getting that because the property didn't sell.
And you had mentioned about some of the mortgages that were on this property?
That's right. Beginning on my page 35, there's a few status of title searches.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
All right. I thank you very kindly there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kulatruglu, do you have any questions for Mr. Kupfer?
No, at this time I do not. Thank you.
Thank you, and I have no questions. So, Mr. Gupta, we're just going to pull up your presentation here, and you can proceed. Thank you.
Honorable Chairperson of the Board, respected assessor has presented the market income for the subject property at a net operating income of $150,459 and use a capitalization rate of 5.85%. And fund subject property has been put at $2,354,000. Assessor just mentioned that it is in line with the 2023 board decision. Just to mention that board decision is already been filed for an appeal with the municipal board. The applicant has not accepted that board order for the 2023 appeal. Board order. Coming to the calculation, the net operating income, the assessor has taken a total lease area of 7,237 square feet for the basement, whereas the total leasable area in the basement is only 1,370 square feet. That was established by the City of Winnipeg assessor way back in 2013 for assessing the total area leasable in the basement. Thus, an excess area of 5,867 square feet has been used to calculate and add the additional income of $42,631 to the net operating income. Once this additional amount is removed from that total income of $150,459, the net operating income will be much lower. But just to carry on the discussion and taking into account the same percentage vacancy loss of 11%, the expenses at 3%, and the shortfall amount used by the assessor, the net operating income will come down to about $130,773. I would like to add here that the statement of income and expense, which have been filed for many years, for the subject year, there has been a net operating loss of $129,637 instead of any income coming from the property. The property has been vacant for many years now. It seems that the rate of rent used by the submission by the assessor on page 39 and 40 is derived from the lease data of the properties that are outside downtown area, with only one property that is in the downtown area is 5 Donald Street at an average square feet rate of $13 per square feet. The rental rate is on a very higher side for evaluating income for this property and not in actual comparison with the downtown properties. To continue the discussion, even if this rate of $13 per square foot for the sold or downtown properties considered to make the calculations, the projected income on the subject property will be $130,773, and with a net operating income of $98,145, keeping in account vacancy loss at 11%, expenses at 3%, and the shortfall of $14,320 utilized by assessor in the calculations. We have used a capitalization rate of 7%, which is the current market capitalization rate, and then the capitalized value of this property comes to $1,402,071. To continue with this net operating income and to take the figure of $98,145 and utilize an actual operating capitalization rate of 7.5% prevalent in the market for the subject property, the value is further reduced to $1,308,600. That is more in line with the last assessed value of 2016 at $1,372,000. There has been no substantial income since 2016 on this property, and it was only a meager net revenue of $8,232 from the basement area of 1,370 square feet till 2020. The overall capitalization rate used by the assessor of 5.85% is usually for Class A buildings. Even the general analysis reports attached by the assessor show a cap rate of close to 5% for Class B buildings, and the actual market cap rate is higher than that for the buildings in Class C. The subject properties is most likely to be classified into Class C. The applicant has no confirmation whether it is in Class B or Class C, but the local real estate agents have always referred to the subject property as Class C. Again, reiterating the fact that applicant is not sure whether it is a Class B or a Class C property. Coming down to the listings attached by the assessor in this presentation, these are all various listings used by various real estate agents from time to time, and they are all marketing materials. The applicant has not secured any confirmed transaction on any of those areas as marketed by the real estate agents, claiming claiming the total leasable area as 21,000 square feet at one point. And if you go by and look at the other listing by Shindigo, they are claiming the total leasable area as only 10,000 square feet in the building. So the applicant is absolutely not sure how much is the leasable area in the building, but all along from 2008 till the time of the last income and expense statement, the total area filed by the applicant on all income expense statements has been only 11,916 square feet for the entire property. Applicant would also like to mention that the total footprint of the building is much less than the land area taken by the assessor at 7,139 square feet. It is almost 90% of that land area, and the building footprint is approximately around 6,500 square feet. The last lease on the main floor was for about approximately 4,000 square feet, and the copy of that lease must be with the city in their records as a business assessment, and the second floor was leased at 3,900 square feet only. So the areas used for calculation by the assessor are not in line with the actual leasable area in the building. Therefore, the applicant humbly requests the chairperson and the board to review the calculations in the light of facts and figures and revise the value of the property to $1,372,000 or lower. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kupfer, any questions?
I want to clarify, you've been the owner since, what, 2008, is that correct?
Pardon?
Have you been the owner since 2008?
Yes.
Okay. We've included the master rent roll from that time when you did have tenants. iTech LASIK Incorporated. Do you remember that tenant?
Yes.
Yes. And they were paying $27.37 per foot for main floor space, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Showing another tenant on the second floor here. Showing a tenant rate of $11.70 for second floor space. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then beyond that, I'm showing a third Taking Charge Inc. Again, second floor space paying $17.82 a foot. Is that correct?
Correct.
For second floor space.
Yeah.
Okay. What rate per foot did you use in your workup?
Please come again.
What rental rate are you using in your valuation?
I've taken the rental rate used by you at net rent of $13 square foot. The rents that you have mentioned, they were gross rates.
Now, if you're using the same rents as me, how have you come up with a drastically different net operating income?
Yes, because the square foot area I've used from your mention is premise ID 20801. I've utilized 4136 square foot area at the rate of $13 a square foot, making the potential rate at $53,767. Then the premise ID 20802, which is 1,000 square foot area at the rent of $13 a square foot at 30,000 square foot potential rent. And then premise ID 33424, leasable area 3,900 square feet, rent $13 a square foot, total potential rent 46,800 square foot, for $46,800. Then premise ID 279929, leasable area 1370 square foot, rent $12.56 as utilized by you, and the potential rent at 17,206. Total of this comes to $130,773. I have calculated vacancy loss of 11% on this. That is
Mr. Gupta, could you repeat that number? 130?
773.
Thank you. Sorry.
And then the vacancy loss of 11% as utilized by you, $14,385. Expenses, a meager 3% on that, $3,923. Shortfall of $14,320 as utilized by assessor. So the net operating income comes to $98,145. The capitalization rate utilized on this is 7%, and the capitalized value comes to $1,402,071.
Of the 21,711 square feet, the total building square footage, how much of it have you calculated as leasable for your workup?
This would be 11,916. I will just add it up to tell you. This comes to 10,406 square feet.
2,406?
Yes.
Approximately half of the building is not being evaluated in your workup then as leasable?
I would not say that half of the building is not utilized. I would say that the numbers utilized by the real estate agents are not realistic.
So of the 21,000 roughly square feet, only half of the building space is leasable.
Yes, and coming back to the leases which you just mentioned, on the main floor by the ITech Lasik and on the second floor, even the square foot area on those leases is same in line with what I've just mentioned as a total leasable area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colatruglu. Do you have any questions?
The building itself basically takes up the entire lot, correct?
Not the entire lot. The entire lot size is 7139 square foot. But the building takes up less amount than that. The building footprint is approximately 90% of that, because there is 20 feet, approximately 20 feet space, a linear measurement, which is not utilized as a footprint of the building.
Okay, just forgive me for a moment here. And is that to the rear of the building, or is
Yes.
it to that would be
Rear of the building.
So that would be sort of under where the
parquet is.
Where the parkade is, correct?
Correct.
But that's owned by another entity, correct?
No, that land is owned by the same corporation under the same title,
Right.
but the utilization is done by the parkade as a right of way. So that land is vacant and they have a right of way to go into the parkade.
Gotcha. But there's a structure that actually goes over top of that.
Over the top of that, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was confusing. Okay. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. Oh, I think, Ron, I think you're muted there.
Yes, I have none. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You have no questions? Yeah, no,
Thank you.
thank you. And I have no questions. Mr. Kupfer, any need for a summation here?
Just that again, I'd reiterate that I believe our value is a reasonable one, and the increased vacancy has already been taken into account by the Board of Revision for this assessment cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gupta, would you like to summarize it all?
Honorable Chairman and the board, my summary is that please reduce the valuation of the building to the previous amount of $1,372,000, which was established in 2016 by the municipal board as well, and help us reduce the taxes. The building has been sitting vacant, and it's a huge drain to carry on the building. It's a downtown property which would ideally be filled up, and there should be activity, but unfortunately, the taxes and other expenses are draining it down. So I really seek your help to survive.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us this morning, and you'll receive our decision shortly in the mail. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, it's 10:27, so we'll take a short break till about 10:40, and then we'll resume with our last property.
You're live.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call the hearing back to order. So the next item on our docket today is 276 Portage Avenue. And Ms. Carnegie, if you can please swear in Mr. Mercury.
Thank you. Mr. Mercury, please state your full name.
James Mercury.
You affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Sorry, were you able to hear me there, Mr. Mercury?
Oh, sorry. James Mercury.
And you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see that we have 3 points of appeal on this property, gentlemen. So I'm just going to, obviously you're aware that the onus reverts to the applicant for liability and classification. So I'm just wondering how you want to proceed here. Do you want to do that piece first and then do the income, or what's your?
So if I may, typically we deal with the liability issue first, then we move to the evaluation.
Yeah,
but
okay,
obviously flexible here. So
yeah, no, that's what I was going to propose, but I just wanted to be sure everyone's comfortable with that. So in that case, then, first of all, Mr. Kupfer, can I get you to read the property onto the roll, and then we'll have Mr. Mercury proceed.
File number 23-431, roll number 1209-322-4100, and the street address is 276 Portage Avenue.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Mercury, you can proceed now. I'm just, this is your applicant MLT Aikens brief that we'd be looking at here?
that's correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So this appeal obviously relates to 276 Portage Avenue. This is the Aveda Hair School, commonly known as, although owned by a separate legal entity. So essentially, in a nutshell, what the issue is here is this is a school tax exempt entity. The assessor and the dispute here relates to whether or not the exemption, the school tax exemption for this hair institute should apply to the entire building, or if the assessors is entitled to essentially carve up the building and only permit a school tax exemption to a portion of the building. So that is in essence the issue. So I will come back to that and walk you through the legislation and some of the prior decisions, which in our view make it clear that the school tax exemption should apply to the building as a whole. But just by way of background, you can see actually from the assessor's brief, the total square footage leasable area here is 33,500 square feet. And the assessment is a total of $4,759,000. Altus will be dealing with the valuation side, but in terms of the proportionate taxable versus school tax exempt portion. You can see from the assessor's brief that only 3,503,000 is school tax exempt, or 24,650 square feet. The fully taxable portion that the assessor has indicated on the supplemental assessment that was issued and to which we dispute is $1,256,000, or 8,850 square feet. And so that is what is at issue. So if you have regard to the brief, I'll just take you through briefly if I could. So if you look at, and it is bookmarked on the left-hand side, so you can easily kind of navigate through the brief. It is long, but we'll go through it fairly quickly. The first tab, which is at page 5 of the brief, is just excerpts from the Municipal Assessment Act. And the specific exemption to which we are referring is section 23(1)(e) of the Act, which is at page 9. And you will note it indicates that property that is owned by or held in trust for and is used by I'm sorry, it's D, I said E, it should be E. D, owned by or held in trust for or used by a college or seminary of learning to a maximum exemption of 1.62 hectares. So there's no dispute that there is leasehold ownership here by the Aveda Institute. And the only question is whether they fulfill the requirements for an exemption for the building as a whole. So that is the relevant excerpt. So the lease agreement actually has been included as well. That's at tab 2, page 12. PDs, it's the landlord is 10021129 Manitoba Ltd. The sole tenant in this building and occupier is PDC Personal Development Center, which operates as Aveda Institute. That is the lease. And you will see pursuant to the lease that page 13, the tenant PDC or Aveda is leasing the entire building. It's not only a portion of the building, and it's a full lease, single occupant of this building. So that's the lease. Tab 3, which is at page 41. This was our initial application for the school tax exemption, which was in May 3rd, 2023. By way of background, Aveda Institute previously occupied property in the Exchange District at 80 Rory Street. We had previously applied for school exemption a few years back for that property. It was granted by the City Assessment Department. The entire building was declared, or the property they occupied was school tax exempt. And so when they moved, they purchased the real estate at 276 Portage Avenue. It took some time to transfer their operation to those new premises. As you can see, in May, we had identified or notified the assessment department they were moving, and we had asked that they essentially transfer the school exemption from the one building to the other. That led to an inspection process. An assessor had walked through the building and I believe had reviewed the permits. And my understanding is that the assessor had noticed that some of the space was in fact vacant, which is true. I'll take you through some of the photographs, and it really was kind of swing space or transition space but all to be used for the Aveda Institute. And so for whatever reason, the assessor determined it was appropriate to essentially break apart the building in terms of only that amount of space, which was actually being actively used by the Institute for its training programs, and essentially make its best estimate to eliminate all vacant space and treat it as taxable. So that's the approach that the assessor has taken. I'll get to that shortly in terms of whether that is in fact a correct way to approach things, which we say it is not. The tab 4, which is page 76, is just the occupancy permit that just shows that the Aveda Institute, which is the Hair School, is taking occupancy. Tab 5, which starts at page 78, is just the outline of the curriculum at the Aveda School. again, I don't think this is a matter of dispute, but if you scroll through, starting at page 80, you can see the various programs that are offered at this school. And that's just taken from their website. Page 85 is, again, the curriculum outline. And you can see the various programs that are being offered at this institute. If you go to page 87, these are the floor plans. We don't have to spend too much time here. I'll take you through it just very briefly. We're looking at page 87 is the first floor. You can see Portage Avenue. You enter, then on the top of the screen are various kind of workstations where the students are put through their various programs. There's various stations and so forth. This is all used for the school. You go to the second floor, the next page. Again, I'll take you through some of the photos as well. But there's more classroom space up on the second floor. There is, you can see a salon area for models and so forth. There's a lunchroom, another classroom, some flex space and so forth. Then up on the third floor is more what I would describe as the administrative wing. On the left-hand side, the various offices of the staff, the school, including their president. There's a gym area there that is for the use of the students at the school. It is not leased to any third party. As I mentioned, there's only one lease in place. There's an art room there that's part of the program, and then finally the fourth floor, which is presently there's no one housing the offices in that space. This is formerly the land titles office, or Terranet previously occupied this building. So they're still in the process of moving a few things around, but the current intention for this fourth floor is to be used for events, graduation events, gatherings for the students at the school. There is a couple of small open areas on the fourth floor, but it still will require some additional configuration as we go forward. We move along tab 5, I believe, page 92. You can just see some of the photographs. This is the first floor entrance. If you walk in through Portage Avenue, there's a desk there. You can see on the left-hand side, there's some workstations. And I understand Mr. Navarro will be dealing with this in the valuation side, but the way this is set up, it's clearly a single occupant building. This is, you can see you walk right into the hair school. There's no security or anything of that nature. So the property is not currently constructed in a way that would allow a third-party tenant to come in and have a 24-hour access to the facility. This is the hair school. So just some additional photos, page 93. You can just see some of the workstations and so forth, some of the mannequins. Page 94. There's just a staff and student sign there on the wall. There's the locker room at page 96 for the students. Starting at page 98 is we're now onto the second floor, and onwards you can see additional classrooms at page 99. Sign on the wall, page 100, 101. This is additional classroom space still being developed. We get through to tab 11, third floor photos. This is the admin space I talked about earlier of the school. You can see page 105, the gym area. Again, still in fairly rough shape, but this is for the benefit of the students. Training room also on page that's on the third floor. You can see at page 107 that room there is used for photo shoots and is part of their overall program for the students. And then tab 12, again, just a couple of photos. This is largely a vacant space, but there are a couple of open areas, and at least according to the owner, the intention is to use it for internal events for members of the Aveda school. So tab 13 is just confirmation that Aveda, and you can see at page 113, second box from the bottom. You can see Aveda Institute is recognized as a private vocational institution by the government of Manitoba. So for hairstyling, there's no, I don't believe any dispute that it is recognized as a school. So that's a very quick and general overlay of the building itself. I know Mr. Navarro will be dealing with additional aspects of it when it gets to the valuation side. But what I wanted to address in this presentation in particular is how do we apply this exemption? And is the assessor entitled to break apart the building essentially to identify what appears to be vacant space and essentially treat that as entirely taxable? That is, whether it's vacant space or used by somebody else, for example, that's not a non-ancillary use. In either case, that does not turn that space into taxable space. That's just not the way that Municipal Assessment Act, how it operates and how it's to be implemented. The case at page 115 is the case that's often been cited to the board. It's the Law Society of Manitoba decision. That was a building at 219 Kennedy Street. The debate there was whether or not that building should be, and that real estate should receive a school tax exemption on the basis that the Law Society is a seminary of learning, or broadly speaking, a school. Came before the Board of Revision. The board initially adopted the position that there was approximately 1/3 of the space was actually being used with classrooms and meeting rooms, etc., for their educational program. And the remaining space they treated as fully taxable. So what they did is kind of allocated various different parts of the building to what they roughly thought was school purposes, and the other was for admin space or part of their insurance program. It came before the court. And I think actually both the assessor and the taxpayer in that case were actually in agreement that the way the board dealt with it is really not the appropriate way. Either the entire building, entire property should be exempt as a seminary of learning, or it should not. The debate really in that case was whether the Law Society was a seminary of learning or not. But what we thought was now a well-established and not controversial is the fact that the focus is on whether the institute itself is a seminary of learning. If it is, then the entire building is exempt. So I'm going to take you to the relevant excerpts from this decision. If you look at page 130, paragraph 29, this is the Chief Justice of Manitoba. In my view, it does not follow that because portions of the property at 219 Kennedy are utilized for the Law Society's regulatory purpose or a different purpose, its otherwise exempt status as a seminary of learning should be lost. If such would be the inevitable result, the Act would indicate that the building must be solely used for a seminary of learning. Solely does not appear, and we're not to read that into the legislation. So if we go down, paragraph 33, the court indicates, given what I have determined is the dominant activity at 219 Kennedy, education, there's nothing in the use of that property that would modify my earlier conclusion that the Law Society's primary purpose is educative, and the entire building was declared school tax exempt. And if there's any doubt about that, you can see at paragraph 36, where the assessor in that case actually conceded that you don't need to use the entire building for the seminary of learning. And in fact, you can see in that case, the assessor, contrary to the position it is taking today, for whatever reason, actually you can see a quote from the city's own submission that if the court determines that the society is a college or seminary of learning, then the exemption applies. If the court takes the position it's not a seminary of learning, then the exemption does not apply. And it's the nature of the society or the institution, not the nature of uses in various portions of the building, that is crucial to the issue. And then paragraph 37, the court says, I've examined the property at 219 Kennedy. He concludes that the dominant activity is educational. and therefore the entire building should be exempt. And then again, there's additional commentary from another case, Justice Oliphant, paragraph 38. Because non-ancillary activities do not detract from the dominant or primary purpose, because the property doesn't have to be used exclusively for educational purposes to maintain its tax-exempt status, I see no useful purpose in analyzing the building on a room-by-room basis. And again, finally, paragraph 39, in such as the case such as the present, the preliminary and fundamental task is to determine whether an institution's primary purpose is educational, and by extension, to determine if the characterization seminary of learning is appropriate. And then part of that determination includes identifying the dominant activity. And in my view, the purpose of section 23(1)(d) is to exempt, once so designated, all seminaries of learning from school tax, regardless of whether a portion of the real estate is used for other purposes. And you can see that in that particular case, accordingly, they've made the determination that the school tax exemption that was previously applied to only 1/3 of the building should be applied to the property as a whole. And so that case was decided many years ago, and in my experience over the last several years has been relatively consistently applied to various other seminary, not only seminaries of learning, but other exempt institutes throughout Manitoba, whether it be hospitals, schools, places of worship, churches, synagogues, etc. That typically, at least in my experience, the assessor is not stripping the building apart on a room-by-room basis. I would suggest that's not contemplated in the Act. It would be an extremely onerous process to continue to modify assessments. If you can imagine, you have here, imagine that over the course of time, the Aveda Institute made use of, let's say, another 400 square feet of space, put a small classroom on the 4th floor. Well, is the assessor going to run back out and issue a supplemental assessment again to add that to the assessment? It's just not contemplated. It would be an absurd way to approach the Act. It would be something different if there was a third-party tenant, for example, who was, let's say, leasing the entire 4th floor, who came in, who was totally separate from the institute. In that instance, the assessor under Section 11 of the Municipal Assessment Act could, in fact, create a new role and issue assess that party as an occupier, taxable occupier, but that hasn't been done. So I think you have the point. I did include a tab 15 finally. This was another case that dealt with the Seven Oaks Hospital and the Wellness Institute, if you're familiar with that facility. Again, the issue there was whether the Wellness Institute was part of the hospital and should receive a full tax exemption as part of the hospital. The assessor took the building that only half of it should get it, because there's portions of that building where, in fact, members of the public could use the facility. It was in the nature of a fitness facility. It was open to members of the public, and the court again, actually this case predated the Law Society decision, but finally at paragraph 36, 37 of that case, pages 148, court is very clear. The Municipal Assessment Act does not stipulate that the building must be used exclusively for the provision of hospital services as defined in the Health Services Insurance Act to obtain the exemption. And in paragraph 37, the assessor asks us to interpret the Act to limit hospital to a place where only defined medical services are provided. This would lead to results inconsistent with the general objectives of the Municipal Assessment Act. And the same, I would suggest, applies here. So in summary, I don't think there's any dispute. The Aveda Institute is in fact a school. I don't think there's any dispute that the dominant activity is in fact, and only activity at this facility is education. And for those reasons, it has satisfied the section 23(1)(d) of the Act, and the entire building should be declared school tax exempt. And so we are asking that change to classification liability be made, as I have outlined. So with that, I'm certainly open to any questions that the assessor or panel members may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kupfer, any questions?
Yes, please. Mr. Mercury, were you present with the assessor for the inspection in June 2023?
I was not present at that inspection, but I have inspected the building in some detail, yes.
Okay. You can confirm then that at that time, and I'm not sure about as of this day, but certainly as of January 1st, 2023, the fourth floor was not currently occupied by anybody, correct?
Well, when you say it's not occupied, it's subject to the lease. So technically, yes, it's occupied by Aveda. Is it actively being used for classroom space and so forth? No, the main classrooms and so forth are down on the lower floors. But when the word occupancy, to me, yes, they clearly are an occupier. They lease it. They have access to it. They could use it for storage or other ancillary purposes to the facility. But it's essentially, whether you want to use the word vacant space or not, it's not actively being utilized, but it is certainly occupied by Aveda.
Okay, not currently in use, being renovated, will be occupied by Aveda at some point in the future. Is that correct?
No, it is still occupied by Aveda. It will be further utilized by Aveda at a later point in time for likely for events and so forth, graduation events and other gatherings for the students.
My field assistant here made note of a coffee shop to be put in on the main floor, approximately 350 square feet. Can you confirm if that's in place as of today?
No, there's no coffee shop that I was aware of. I'm not sure what the long-term plans may be for this building, but photos are there. There's no, there's somewhat of an open space as you walk in on the right-hand side. I'm not sure if it's in the photographs, but there's no coffee shop in the building.
Currently.
That's correct.
Okay. We also have a note here, again, from the same inspection and confirmed by, I believe, by one of the owners. The third floor is to be approximately half used as a gym/yoga studio. Is that correct?
Well, I think you saw photos of the gym area. I just go back to it briefly. It's part of the school. It's just one of the amenities. There is a gym area. I'm not sure if I would describe it as a yoga studio. Perhaps it could be utilized for that. But yes, there's I guess you can call it a gym area. It's not leased to any third party. It's owned and operated by Aveda, and it's made available to the students.
Okay. Roughly then, how do you feel a coffee shop or a gym fits into your definition of a seminary of learning?
It's an amenity. Well, first of all, there is no coffee shop in the building. In terms of a fitness area, it's not uncommon for various organizations to have fitness facilities or some types of amenities. It does not all have to be classroom space. I've been in many buildings where you see space like this, not only gyms, but kitchens and other entertainment areas. Well, they're just ancillary to the overall use. It's the building is a seminary of learning. I'm not sure what else I can add to that.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt, do you have any questions for Mr. Mercury?
Yes, Madam Chairperson. Mr. Mercury, I just need a little background in regards to what actually transpired. So I want to talk to you about, they were originally in Rory Street, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And what sort of premises did they have? How many square feet, or did they have the whole building? I would imagine so.
Yes, it was. I'd have to go back to it. If you just bear with me. There was a previous. I think we included actually the original. I know we did. If you could just bear with me for. Yeah. So the original. Actually, page 70 of my brief, you'll see a letter dated July 27th, 2020, and it provides a very detailed overview of the nature of the property that they were occupying. It was approximately 8,900 square feet. at 80 Rory Street. I think it's actually a condominium building that they were in. So they're independent condo units in that building in the Exchange. And essentially they had outgrown that space and so they were there for, I'm not sure how long they were there, for some years, since 2011 it appears. We provided the lease, we provided very detailed information on the nature of the school and so forth. You can see it. I don't know that we have to go through that, but they had outgrown the space. So they were looking for a new facility, I believe, for some time. The owner, Mr. Roberto Sinopoli, eventually identified the space at 276 Portage Avenue, and they purchased that building. I can't recall the date that they had purchased it. It took some time, obviously, to transfer the building and to make a number of alterations to the building to suit their needs. So that was the reason for the transfer.
All right. So, like you said, they outgrew the existing building, and therefore they purchased 276 Portage Avenue, which is sufficing their needs, I guess, and it's probably like 3 times the size.
It would be considerably larger, yes. I don't have the square footage of the, yes, that's right.
The leasable space supposedly is around 33,500.
Yeah,
roughly speaking. So they bought the building, did they not?
They did. It's through a related company, so there's a number of companies. So it's all owned by the same party, and then they entered into essentially an on-arm's length lease with the PDC Professional Corporation.
Okay. So they signed a lease, I think that you had talked about in May, was it? Maybe?
The lease is dated May 1st, 2023.
Yeah. And was that for the entire building?
It is for the entire building.
And was it like a 5-year term or longer?
I am just looking at that. Don't know the precise term. Lease commencement date is May 1st, 2023. The term, it's 5 years.
Okay. So, but going back to Rory, they had 100% exemption.
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm just looking at how the city, and I just use percentage wise. So the exempt portion is about 73%, and the non-exempt, the taxable portion is around 26, 27,
Yeah,
something like that.
That's
So-
approximate. I haven't done the math.
So, yeah. So, and like you say, it's almost like an a la carte going with, if they, I guess the inspection took place and this is what they determined. So,
Yeah.
I guess, all right. I think I'm just scrambling here, but I think I have the whole picture. So
Yeah.
I thank you, Mr. Mercury. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Colatruglio, do you have any questions for Mr. Mercury?
Mr. Mercury, just to be clear, the previous location was a condo unit within Ashdown Warehouse, correct?
I believe that's correct.
And they had that one unit to themselves, and that was totally exempted at that time
That's correct.
for school tax, that is.
Yes.
Okay. And the lease for the new location on Portage is for the entire building,
Yes.
and there are no third-party leases at this point in place.
That's correct.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. And I believe all my questions have been answered. So thank you, Mr. Mercury. Now, Mr. Kupfer, I noticed in your brief that you do have some mention of this issue. So would you like to present on this issue specifically?
Yes, I would. It won't be an overly long one. Mr. Mercury has touched on quite a few points. The one issue I have to bring up, of course, is the omission of Section 26, which he hasn't mentioned, proportionate building tax exemption. So if you don't have a copy of the act in front of you, this is available in Mr. Mercury's tab 1, Section 26, just below 23. So this is what clearly and plainly gives us the ability to proportion out classifications in this way. The section reads, where a portion of a building is used for a purpose for which an exemption from taxation is available under Section 22 or 23, which in this case it is, we're in agreement that Aveda is exempt. The exemption applies to a portion of the taxation, A, that applies to the building in the same proportion as the used portion of the building bears to the building as a whole, and B, that applies to the land on which the building is located in a proportion that reflects the portion of the land that is required for the exempted use of the portion of the building. So this isn't just something we're making up. It's the opinion of the department that we are following the Municipal Assessment Act and properly proportioning out these sections of the building when this type of situation occurs. With regards to this property, 276 Portage, as I've indicated, we have had a recent inspection, not by myself personally, but by one of our field assistants who also spoke with Karen Sinopoli, I believe pronunciation is. When this was entered for classification, like I indicated, only the space that is currently being occupied and used specifically by Aveda is being given the Class 40 exemption. So those are shown on my page 23, the very last page of the brief where this information was communicated. This is an email between Justin and Mr. Mercury showing the first floor, 10,000 total square feet minus what was indicated to be a 350 square foot coffee shop. The second floor, the full 10,000 square feet being used by Aveda. The third floor was indicated to us that only half will be used by Aveda and then half will be a gym/yoga studio. It's not clear to me whether that will be separately leased or included in Aveda's lease. And then the fourth floor, currently vacant and is 3,500 square feet. Aveda will occupy the remaining vacant space at some time in the future. So that's why it wasn't added at this time. So the rationale here is, as of the date of inspection, as of we're looking at a January 1, 2023 condition date here, we are allotting the 40S classification for every square foot that Aveda is currently using. And the space that is not in use by Aveda is being given the Class 60 fully taxable allotment. So that's shown on my page 12, the breakdown between the 40S and the 60T, just the different proportions there, 3,503,000 40S tax exempt and 1,256,000 60T. So that's my presentation on the class and liability issue, and I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mercury.
Yes, Mr. Kipper, you indicate that there's no reference in my presentation to Section 26 of the Act, and I guess my question for you is, did you review the Law Society decision that is referenced, which deals very squarely with Section 26 of the Act and the fact that it is not applicable when we are dealing with the Seminary of Learning exemption?
I reviewed the decision. I think that was your question.
Yes, but did you review the decision in with particular reference to Section 26 and whether or not it gave the assessor the authority to essentially split apart the building into different taxable versus non-taxable portions?
Yes, I read the entire decision.
Okay, so if you look at page 133 of my brief, and in particular paragraph 36 of that decision, in which the court indicates that Section 26 was not applicable, are you suggesting that you're now adopting a different position than what the assessor acknowledged in that case and what the court decided?
I'm speaking to this property in this case, and in my opinion, section 26 is absolutely applicable to this property.
So how is it, the court indicates that when we were talking about the seminary of learning exemption, just so that we're in agreement, that it is section 23(1)(d) that we're considering, correct?
Can you repeat that, please?
It is section 23(1)(d) that is the seminary of learning exemption. That's what's at issue here, correct?
Correct.
And that's also what was at issue with respect to the Law Society building at 219 Kennedy, correct?
That was one of the issues, yes.
That was the basis for which the school tax exemption was applied, correct?
Correct.
And the assessor in that case acknowledged that if the court determines that the Law Society was a seminary of learning, then the exemption applies in totality, and that section 26 doesn't apply. You're aware of that?
What page are you referencing now?
Page 133, paragraph 36, and subparagraph 27, quoting from the City Assessment Department.
Beginning with, if the court determines?
Yes, that's a statement by the City Assessment Department Legal Counsel.
Okay.
If the
Okay.
court determines that the society is a seminary of learning, then the exemption applies to the whole building. If the
It doesn't
court
say
agrees
the
with the
whole building,
position,
it says the exemption applies.
the exemption applies in
Yeah,
totality.
correct.
Read it
No,
in
no,
context.
no. You're adding in totality and you're adding into the whole building. If you're going to quote it, please quote it.
That, Mr. Comfort, I can tell you as counsel in that decision, that is entirely, you can read the decision again. That is the position of the assessment department. Are you disputing that?
Again, I wasn't part of this. I'm disputing that you're reading what is written here under section 27.
So you're suggesting that the assessment department's position has always been, I want to be fair, Mr. Comfort, because I would suggest that you're not accurately stating the position of the assessment department. Did you review with anybody how the assessment department, in fact, dealt with the Law Society matter?
Again, I wasn't a part of this particular hearing. I'm speaking in regards to 276 Portage Avenue, and I believe that section 26 would apply in that instance.
All right, so paragraph 37 of that case, the court determines that the dominant activity at the location was educational. And for that reason, the entire building was exempt. You agree with that?
The board's decision to limit the proportion of the exemption to 1/3 absent clarifying reasons seems inconsistent and arbitrary. Is that what you're
Yes.
referring to?
I'll read it for you. I have already examined the property at 219 Kennedy. I had determined that dominant activity at that location was educational. And even if section 22 and 23 are subject to 26, given my specific finding and the board's implicit finding with which I concur, the Law Society is a seminary of learning, the board's decision to limit the proportion of the exemption to 1/3, absent clarifying reasons, seems inconsistent or arbitrary. Paragraph 39, in such a case as the present, the preliminary and fundamental task is to determine whether an institution's primary purpose is educational, and by extension, to determine if the characterization seminary of learning is appropriate, and so forth. And then it goes on. In my view, the purpose of 23(1)(d) is to exempt, once so designated, all seminaries of learning from school tax, regardless of whether a portion of the real estate is used for other purposes. Do you agree with that statement?
That is what it says, yes.
Okay, so regardless of whether someone else is using it or whether it's vacant, if the dominant activity is educational, the court is saying you exempt it as a whole, correct?
That is what part 39 says, yes.
All right. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Colatruglo, do you have any questions for Mr. Kupfer?
No, I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Merritt?
I have one, Madam Chairperson. Mr. Kupfer, when the inspection was made, the city made an interpretation in regards to the vacancy spaces that that weren't, I guess, in use. So did the city interpret the vacancy spaces? And I would say this is what probably happened, that any vacancy spaces that weren't, I guess, active, you probably made the assumption and slotted them into the class code 60. Is this correct?
Correct. The assumption is class code 60, unless it can be proven or shown that this usage falls squarely within the definition of our 40S exemption.
So just to summarize, so those particular vacancy spaces represent about 26.4%.
Correct.
Okay. I thank you kindly. Thank you.
Thank you. So Mr. Kupfer, you only areas, you used the term, I believe when you were presenting, only areas that are occupied. Now, if this is the only lessee in the building and they are leasing the entire building, are they still not occupying it? I mean, I understand that some of the space may not be actively being used, but are they not considered to be occupying the entire building?
They are, but the wording within the act actually specifies use. So that's why I'm bringing up use as being pertinent here. Both 23(1)D and 26 specify that the building in the area must be in use by that party that gets the exemption. And because these areas are not currently in use by Aveda, they are not subject to the exemption, in our opinion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Mercury, any summation?
Yes, I do briefly. I will say the position the assessment department is taking here is entirely new to me. To my knowledge, we look at exempt properties across the city of Winnipeg, and in fact, the province, that the assessor does not go into these buildings and carve them up. For example, a hospital building, if there were a large portion of the building that were used for storage or empty, you do not see the assessment department changing and issuing supplemental assessments to say that 10% of the building is now taxable. It's a hospital, and there may be portions that are not currently utilized. There may be there may be a cafe in portions of the building, or a cafeteria. That doesn't mean you carve up the building. The same with the place of worship. I could go down the list, universities, so forth. You look at the University of Manitoba, it's exempt. There are large portions of that real estate, I would suggest, that are perhaps vacant, or not utilized, classrooms that are empty, maybe being transitioned, but you do not see the assessment department going in and carving up the property. Section 26 does not give the assessor the authority to go in and do what he has done here. Section 26 is intended for other situations. For example, if there is a otherwise taxable building and there is, let's say, a museum in that building that is in itself exempt, Section 26 allows the assessor to go and give an exemption in respect of that occupant of the building, the museum, that would otherwise be entitled to an exemption. This is not how Section 26 applies. The Law Society decision is very, very clear that Section 23(1)D, the primary focus is on the nature of the institution, the school. The school occupies it. And what the Law Society decision stated is that the building does not have to be used solely for a school or exclusively for a school. If that were the case, the legislature would have put in the word solely. It didn't. So is this Aveda using the real estate at 276 Portage for a school? Unquestionably it is. Is it using every last square inch of the building for training? No, some of it is empty at the moment, but it doesn't change the fact that the dominant activity is educational. It's using the real estate, and it is a school. The exemption applies. And so, again, I would summarize that the position the assessor is taking here is unfortunate, and I would suggest quite inconsistent with the manner in which it is dealt with virtually every other property I've encountered. So those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kupfer.
I don't see this case really as being as complicated as Mr. Mercury has made it seem here. Sections 23 and 26, I believe, speak quite plainly and encapsulate the issues surrounding this property. We've inspected it, we've done our due diligence, and we are properly proportioning this classification. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes the liability taxation classification part of this presentation. So thank you, Mr. Mercury. And we will move now to the assessed value. So Mr. Kupfer, when you're ready.
So again, we're still dealing with 276 Portage Avenue. We're dealing with the 2023 roll year. So of course, in April 1, 2021 reference date. We have a total assessed value of $4,759,000, as you can see, broken down between those two classifications. Of course, this is a commercial office building, 4 stories in height. The original year of construction is 1910 with an effective year of 1981. The land area is 11,225 square feet, and the leasable area, as we've said, is 33,500 in total. And I'm going to be recommending that the 2024 assessment be confirmed today. Page 2 of my brief, you can see our registration date for the sale was in October 2021, so that was removed. I've included overhead photos as well as some street view photos. Again, you probably recognize the building. I certainly did. The interior photos are taken from the inspection done by a member of our department in June 2023. As you can see, the building has been newly renovated, again with the sale and the change of ownership, change of kind of use there. So I do have some permit information at the end of my brief. You need to scroll through our photos here. Again, you can see on page 8, I believe this is the gym workout area here on the 3rd floor. Still under construction, but has some equipment in there. Page 9 of my brief has our rent comparables table. We have this categorized. That's an OFC, and I have included 34 comparables, a wide range here showing our high end and our low end for downtown OFC properties. Pages 10 and 11 of my brief show the breakdown of the income workup. This is only broken down because of the Class 40 and Class 60. They're both C2 OFC properties, so the leasable area is broken down for that reason. So the first page, we have 24,650 square feet. This is the space we're saying Aveda is using. Currently, we have a modeled rate of $16.27. Everything here is being derived on our model. I haven't touched this. So we've got a 12% vacancy, 3% expenses, a $10 shortfall, and a 7% capitalization rate. And those same rates are being applied to the stream on page 11, with the exception of different rent rates per square foot. These are generally just calculated on our model. It will vary a little bit based on the size of the leasable area, with smaller leasable areas generally corresponding to higher rates per foot. Page 12 of my brief shows the income value summary, the combination of these two streams. Again, we have an estimated market value of $4,759,000 for this property. Pages 13 and 14 are kind of our standard inserts here, our capitalization rate table and our Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. Beginning on page 15, we have income and expense information. So this would have been by the former occupant, Terranet, Manitoba here. We're showing a gross lease, annual gross based rent, which netted out to $14.72, according to the owners for 2020. That's what's shown on page 16. By contrast, like you can see, we're modeling the majority of the space at approximately $16. But it's important to keep in mind that the space was significantly renovated in between these two periods. Included the income statement as well as the COVID questionnaire beyond that. And then page 20 and 21 of my briefs includes some permit information. I apologize about the sizing, it's a little bit off. But adding it together, we've got roughly $1.2 million in permits that were done after the purchase, leading up until now. And then the final few pages of my brief, I believe, are just pertaining to the classification and liability issues. We won't cover those again. So again, I'm going to recommend that this assessment of $4,759,000 be confirmed today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro.
Yes, can you confirm again whether you have made any adjustments to this valuation yourself?
I haven't made any adjustments to this myself.
Okay. By that, I'll take it that everything is modeled. In terms of the rent comparables that you have on page 9, were these chosen by you, or is this sample a sample that we see regularly for Class C office buildings?
I don't believe we have a single sample for OFC class buildings. We track these generally in a big spreadsheet. Like I said, I didn't generally cherry pick these. I've included 34 of them, kind of to show the high end and the low end here. But I put this together.
Okay. Now, would you agree that many of the spaces in this lease comparison chart are of smaller spaces?
Many of them are smaller than the 24,000-ish. We have Aveda as the primary occupant there, yeah.
Okay, and can we agree that we are not considering in this section or this presentation, are we considering the entire space, the 33,500?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you have any leases in place in this chart that are similar in size?
The one that's standing out to me is 195 Fort Street, number 2, and the other one is 65 Rory Street, 303, as being the largest two and closest in size.
Okay. Can I ask you whether you actually took a detailed look at these rent comparisons?
No.
Okay. Can you confirm whether all of these leases are net, triple net?
I can't know, but I can say generally when we're taking in this type of information, we lean towards net leases and try to use net leases.
Okay. Now, in the case of any gross leases that may be in place, would you have netted them out and put them in this chart?
That is not something we generally do.
Okay.
That's not something I've done, certainly.
Okay. And in terms of the capitalization rate that you suggested, 7%, that is consistent for both sections. Your capitalization rate information on page 13 of your brief doesn't have any downtown C class. So I'm assuming that the model is simply making an adjustment there, right?
Correct. I don't believe any of these entities report for OFC or OFD class cap rates.
And to your knowledge, does the model itself adjust for things like heritage status?
I can. So the first property that we discussed today had heritage status, and we were applying, for example, an obsolescence that was halving the building value. I'm not certain if anything is being applied here regarding heritage status.
Okay. So your answer is that you're not sure.
Well, the model can take into account those issues. I'm not sure if anything is being directly applied to this due to heritage status.
Okay. Now, getting back to the parameters on pages 10 and 11, in terms of the size of the property, the leasable areas, does the model adjust for size?
Yeah, I think I stated something to the effect of it'll generally correspond to slightly lower rents per square foot for larger sized areas and vice versa.
Another question is, does this location have on-site parking?
I am not seeing on-site parking from my bird's eye view here.
Okay. And the lease information that you included in here, which pertains to the former tenant, which was Terranet, people may know it as the property registry or the land titles office. Did that lease expire? And when?
All I have is the income and expense information here that was submitted to us, and it's showing the lease was to be running from 2014 to 2022.
Mm-hmm. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt, do you have any questions? Yes. Oh, you know what? You're on mute again, Ron.
Sorry, thanks. Yes, I have some questions. This covered, you have done 2 income streams, and first one, you've done 24,000 some square feet. You've included value 4 million.
You know what, Mr. Merritt,
$169,000.
Mr. Merritt, you're breaking up a bit. I'm not sure whether it's where you're. Maybe try again. Yeah.
Okay. How's this? I took my cursor off the mute. Okay.
That sounds better.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better.
Yes. No.
Yes, that's better. Yeah.
That's better. Okay. Yeah. What happens is I left my cursor on and it sort of screws up things. Anyways, Mr. Kupfer, you have done 2 income streams. Okay, and one is at 24,650 square feet, and you have come to a value on that particular one of 4,468,000. Yet in your final, you come to 3,503,000. Looking at the other income stream, you've done 8,850 square feet. And you've concluded value at $1,845,000, but yet the final value put in is $1,256,000. So I'm adding those 2 final figures and gives you what the city's at of $4,759,000. So am I missing something in regards to what I just mentioned about 4,004,000 and 1,008,000?
I would suggest we're both missing something, Mr. Merritt. I am seeing what you're bringing up here, how the capitalized values by the streams don't match with the estimated value underneath that.
Yes.
Yes, that would require a bit of investigation.
Okay.
Yeah, as of today, I'm here to.
Yeah, like I don't know. I looked and like the first income stream is like it's off $1 million, so 900,000. So I don't know, but yet your number at the bottom works out to be what in total the subject property is. So,
Right, and then the income value summary on page 12 shows the total capitalized value is 6,313,671.
okay. Yeah.
So, Mr. Kupfer, you are sitting with you're staying with your 4,759,000. Obviously, some adjustments have been made to this.
I would suggest that you're right. Some adjustments have been made to this to bring the assessment
Yeah.
down. I didn't personally
right.
make them. I appreciate Mr. Merritt pointing them out.
All right. I'm a numbers person, unfortunately. So I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colatruglio.
Give me a moment, Madam Chair. In your evaluation of the second portion of the building, you're talking that of the vacant portion up on the 4th floor, is that correct?
So the vacant portion on the 4th floor would be the third premise, the 3,500 square foot. The 5,000 we're saying is the gym yoga studio on the 3rd floor, and then the 350 square foot would be the cafe on the main floor.
Okay. And yet, I'm having a little bit of trouble reconciling the fact that on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd floors, you're at 1,627 square foot. And never mind the issue that Mr. Merritt brought up, but then with spaces that are basically, if you eliminate the first one being, if you're saying that's a coffee shop on the main floor, which may or may not be an issue or pertinent, but then you have 2 spaces on the 4th floor, correct? At $18 plus a square foot for each item, correct?
That's correct. So the model rates being produced for the 3rd floor and 4th floor are actually higher than the total, the 24,650.
Does that make sense for a 4th floor in downtown Winnipeg to be that much higher than the main floor?
Well, keep in mind this 24,650 isn't just main floor. This is a combination of 1st floor, 2nd floor, and 3rd floor space.
I appreciate that.
I absolutely take your points. I would simply state that I think our model is a little bit simpler than that. It's just taking the larger leasable area and coming up with a lower rate per square foot as a result of it. It's not factoring in which floor the different premises are on.
All right, those are my questions.
Thank you. So just back to the discrepancy in numbers there, because Mr. Kupfer, you did mention that I think after when you were replying to one of Mr. Navarro's questions about the first property and some depreciation on that based on the heritage status. So is this building also heritage status, and this potentially be what's happening here, or?
I haven't reviewed anything regarding heritage status for this building or why it would impact the income stream.
Okay, so you're not sure what the actual reduction was for then, the adjustment?
No, it may very well have been for that heritage status. That would be a good assumption.
But you're not sure. Okay, thank you.
100%, yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Navarro, please proceed when you're ready.
Madam Chair, we do have some rebuttal. I think we addressed it before we actually go into the presentation.
You have rebuttal on the city's. Yes, we should do that then. Okay, so Nicole, is it in our?
Yes, it's in your SharePoint now, and okay. Mr. Kupfer, I emailed it to you as well.
Okay, here we go.
So I'll just take you through this, and if you could tell me when you're at, when you have the rebuttal open, I'll start.
Okay, I have it.
Yep.
The other panel members have it?
Ready?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay, please proceed, yeah.
Okay, so we can first look at comparison number 13. And if you recall, I asked Mr. Cupford which property was the closest in terms of size to our subject. Our subject is 33,500 square feet. We have 33,502, just a very small difference. And this one is 36,122 square feet. This is the closest in terms of size to our comparison. Now, when we take a look at the lease itself, you can see that the lease that Mr. Cupford notes in here starts in October of 2017. It's a 3-year lease at $16.35. Now, on page 2 of the rebuttal, we can see the property and the actual listing information on it. And you can see on the rental rate, and this is from March 2020, so let's be clear that this is not post-reference date information. You can see that the listing rate is $16.50 per square foot for this property. Relatively no change from the previous lease that Mr. Cupford had listed. In terms of a listing, again, we have to remind ourselves this is a listing, so this is not necessarily what anybody going into this property would have settled on in terms of the lease rate. That's point 1 on that property. The most glaring point on it is actually the type of property that it is. And I've listed those reasons, that those points there. Now, this is a data center, a tier 1 data center. If you know anything about data centers, you know that they are heavy built buildings. They are meant to withstand some natural disasters, probably not an 8-point earthquake, but they can do well under very strong winds and some earth movement. They are also equipped with very specialized equipment. So they have a high load capacity in terms of power supply. They also have backup power supply. And they also have incredible cooling capacity. And the reason for that is because these buildings have to be cooled. They have server rooms inside them, and those rooms have to be cooled. Now, they also come with I'm not sure if I just mentioned it, a backup generator with a 5-day fuel supply and on-site parking. Now, those are not typical for any type of building, let alone our building. So I would state that this is probably not the best comparison in terms of our property. So in terms of what I asked you before, Mr. Cupford, were you aware of any of this?
Can you repeat that, please?
I said, were you aware of any of these issues or these specifications for this building?
For the data center?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Okay, we'll turn to page 3, and this is comparison number 4. This is 136 Market Avenue, 330. You can see clearly, I've included the lease information. I've blocked out the name of the tenant. But it clearly states there, if you can see it, I mean, it's very small print, but it does say gross lease. Were you aware of that, Mr. Cupford?
I'm aware that your rebuttal says gross lease. Yes.
Okay. Now, comparison number 5 is Again, 115 Bannatyne, unit 403. And we have this as a semi-gross lease. So we've listed that there. Comparison number 7 is 136 Market Avenue, unit 360. Again, that is comparison 7 on the list. Again, this is a gross lease. Comparison 27, this is 136 Market Avenue, unit 800. Lease starts at 09/01/2017. We have the rent, and if you look at number 27, it says 9,108 square feet at 1250. This is the lease information, and it says monthly rent of 64.21. Lease area of 6,700 square feet or 1150 per square foot. So I'm not sure who's right in this situation. However, what I've taken from this, I've taken from information that we have at hand at Altus Group. We don't have all of the information for all of these properties. But one thing that I can say consistently about properties in the exchange, and we're talking about older properties, is that many of them have gross leases. And whenever I'm looking at, leases that are in the mid-20s or things like that, there needs to be some further investigation into that. And I would just ask Mr. Cuthbert again, did you actually look at those to see whether they are all net leases versus gross leases? Because we've already found some that are clearly not.
I haven't reviewed the income and expense mailers for any of these comparables. It's done by and large by our department. And I wouldn't say Mr. Navarro has provided sufficient information to confirm one way or another whether these are gross or net leases.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kupfer, do you have any questions on the rebuttal?
No questions on the rebuttal.
Thank you. Mr. Colatruglio, any questions on the rebuttal?
No, I think we have what we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt?
No, thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Okay, and I have no questions either on the rebuttal. Thank you. So, Mr. Navarro, please proceed with your presentation when you're ready.
Okay. So we are starting out with 276 Portage Avenue. If you turn to page 2, you can get the summary. We'll just flip to the next page over. Again, the intended use of this report is to value the property for assessment purposes and for the Board of Revision in particular. In terms of the scope of the work, on page 4, you can see that we have done some internal review, not detailed. We exclude certain things, and you can see that in one of the second last point. We did do an inspection. I was in this location as the demolitions were starting in December of 2022. Mr. Mercury was in there more recently. I'll just glance or skip over the assumptions and limiting conditions and go to page 6, which is our property site maps, some of the same pictures that were probably provided by the assessor. You can see an outside view, an overhead view, and what we call the bird's eye view on page 7. Now on page 8, we do a description of the property itself. So this is a 4-story, noted as a Class C building, heritage property, constructed in 1910 and renovated in 2006. It has a variant age, I believe, of 1981. And there is a vocational school here. This was the former home of Terranet or Land Titles Office. And the improvement is situated on 11,233 square feet, zoned M for multiple use. And this is part of the downtown zoning policy, not to be confused with the general zoning policy for Winnipeg. This is specific to the downtown. The building was originally known as the Burke's Building. I believe it may have been known as the YMCA building as well. Listed as a grade 2 asset by the city of Winnipeg. Heritage designation is registered by notice to the land titles office. So the heritage designation is an actual note, or I'm not sure if we can call it a caveat in the title itself. Now, in terms of other supplemental information, just to make sure that everyone is aware that this is an asset, we did include the long form historical building report from the city of Winnipeg, dated April 1991. So again, rest assured, this is a heritage building. You can see here also that I put in the clip from the online site on heritage properties from the city of Winnipeg. It went into the registry in October of 1999. So it has been there for some time. And it's also noted as a grade 2 heritage property. Now, in terms of the grading system has changed somewhat since the old system. However, properties that were graded after or before the new system came in are still graded under this old system. So this is a grade 2 heritage building. And you can see there that there are some things that need to be preserved, and that is the entire exterior of the building, erection or structure, and such of its interior elements as are specified in the listing, and to ensure that all repairs thereof are appropriate to their special architectural or historical interest, and to prevent or regulate demolition, removal, alteration, or repair of the remainder of such interior in the manner described in subsection C. So just to simplify this thing, for the most part, this is a grade 2 historical asset. So it is the exterior for the most part that is protected. So there are to be no alterations to the exterior of the property. There are, of course, you can make repairs to the exterior. So right here on page 9, again, we go into this: all buildings that were on the former inventory of buildings under the former historical buildings bylaw were deemed to be nominated on the date the new historical resources bylaw came into effect in June of 2014. These must be reviewed by the Historical Buildings and Resource Committee for heritage status by May 30th, 2020. On June 1st, 2014, the nominated list included approximately 130 resources. As well, there are specific incentives and programs that are used to fund heritage properties, and there's a list of these right there. 2 of them are fully subscribed at this point, and those are the Heritage Conservation Grant Program and the City of Winnipeg Heritage Conservation Tax Credit Program. Now, its highest and best use, we deem that to be its current use as a vocational school. In terms of the analysis, we are looking at the physical condition as of January 1, 2023, and the economic conditions as of April of 2021. Now, there are several approaches to value, but we can glance over that. We did not use the cost approach or the sales comparison approach. We used only the income approach. On page 13, you will note a typo on there in the first paragraph. So this was taken directly out of the initial appeal that we did earlier in 2023, when the property was still the property registry, or Terranet as it's known now. So that can be disregarded. We looked at market comparisons in this case. We deemed it to be owner occupied from our perspective. So we were looking specifically at market comparisons. Now, we only used 5 comparisons because we wanted to have a detailed look at them. We're not, I can't throw 30 comparisons at you and look at them properly. So what I can tell you about these 5 is that we did have a detailed look at them. So from our perspective, again, we're taking this from 2 angles. We're looking at the size of the building, its location in the downtown, and its use. And in that sense, we have 2 properties that are very similar. So you don't have the specific street numbers there, so I'm going to give them to you. But that being said, we included the lease information on these properties in the appendix. So many of you can probably understand and figure out where these properties are. Often these buildings are, again, they're well-known properties. So the first comparison is 280 Main Street, and this is CDI College. This is a what we call it, a vocational career school. Again, falls under the same section of the act that we were, I believe, seeking. This one is 24,300 square feet. It is a little bit smaller. However, its lease started in April of 2020 and it goes right to March of 2030. And that one is for $11 per square foot. Now, also, please keep in mind that this was, again, the fit up happens on these properties because they were something else and then they become a school, okay? So, this is taking into account that these buildings have been fitted up for school use. And on top of that, we'll also note that as with our property, which is more of a hairdressing school, the areas are more open. So there's less separation, meaning that there's less partition walls for classrooms and things like that. Whereas Robertson and CDI actually have dedicated classrooms. The fit up would be that much more expensive simply because of the partitions involved in fitting up Robertson and CDI. Now, getting back to the other college that I was talking about, the first one was CDI at 280 Broadway. The second one is Robertson at 180 Main Street, and that is index number 5. And again, this is multi-floor, again, as ours is multi-floor. It's 38,874 square feet. And if you look at the date, January 2020 to December of 34, again, we're much closer to the reference date than any of the assessor's comparisons. The other comparisons are 213 Main Street, that is number index 2. That is an upper floor, 9,892, starting in February of 19 to December of 19. That's 1134 per square foot.
Mr. Var, sorry to, you said index number 2?
Yes.
Is 213 Notre Dame?
Notre Dame.
You'd said Main Street.
Sorry. Yes.
I just wanted to clarify that. Sorry, thank you.
Probably tripping over my tongue. Yes. The second index is 213 Notre Dame Avenue.
Thank you.
The effective age on it is 1950. Although I believe it's, again, earlier construction, and we'll look at that in the appendix. Upper floor, 9,892 square feet. The lease starts in February of 19, goes right to December of 19. Short-term lease. The next one over is 136 Market Avenue, number 3. We have an effective age of 1975. This is an upper floor, 10,026 square feet. The lease starts in August of 20 and goes to July of 25. That is $12.50 per square foot. The fourth one is also in 136 Market Avenue, 1975, upper 9,876 square feet. Goes from August of 18 to July of 23. That is 15 per square foot. And again, the last one is 180 Main Street, which was Robertson multi-floor, 38,874 square feet, going from January 20 to December of 34, $12 per square foot. We have an average or a mean of 1237, a median of 12. And on page 14, you can see that we have an overall for the entire property of $11.50. Why $11.50 and not $12? Well, we can see that we have two comparisons that I think are very good comparisons. 280 Main Street and 180 Main Street, both again vocational schools. One is landing at $11 per square foot. One is landing at $12 per square foot. So we could say that we went at the halfway point, but there are also other circumstances. So we know that from Mr. Mercury's presentation that there was a renovation or fit up for the vocational school, which really encompassed only the two first floors. So the second, the third and the fourth floors were largely untouched. And that would be the reasoning for leveling out the rent and lowering it on a per square foot basis overall. And then judging by the questions to the assessor in terms of the higher rent on the upper floor, that didn't make sense to me either. And again, the way I reasoned this out is that it's probably going to lower the overall rent simply because you have half of the building renovated and half not. So we feel comfortable at proposing a rent of $11.50 for the entirety of the 3,502 square feet. That gives us a market rent of $385,273. Now, in terms of the vacancy, we have applied a vacancy of 12%. That is a market vacancy. That gives us an effective market income of $339,040. And you can follow me on page 18, actually. That is where we have the income approach summary. I'll give you a few seconds to get there. Just everybody ready to go?
Yep.
Okay. So again, 12% vacancy. That gives us $339,040 in potential rent. And from that, we deduct expenses of $50,374. So a shortfall of $10 per square foot, management and other 1% and 2%. Typically, what you'll see from an Altus brief is the 5% and 2%. In this case, I decided to go a different way, and you'll know that in our non-recoverable studies, we often ask for a 25-point adjustment on the capitalization rate. In this case, we have asked for a 25-point capitalization rate, or sorry, 25-point adjustment on the capitalization rate. That is why we have only gone with the 1% and the 2%. In terms of the net operating income, what that works out to is $288,667. The capitalization rate that we've applied is 8%. And the adjustments that we've made is $296,000. That gives us a rounded value or unrounded value of $3,312,333, rounded to $3,312,000. Now, if you go back to page 17, we do comment on why we adjust the capitalization rate. Now, we did hand out a capitalization rate study along with all of our materials. You can see on page 17 of that study. I can just quote it if you want to turn to it, you can. But in that study, for Class C buildings, Altus Group for 2023 was using a capitalization rate of 7.75%. Does that mean that every property that is a C has to fall into that category of 7.75%? No, obviously there can be some adjustments to that. In terms of this property, we thought that 7.75 was appropriate with a 25-point bump. 8% actually is fair from our perspective. So the reasons for that obviously are this is a single tenancy, and that is additional risk to this property. Anytime you have a single tenancy, you simply have more risk. The reason you partition buildings out and have different units within a building is because you're trying to maximize the space, maximize your earning potential for that property, and of course to limit the risk due to vacancy. So if something happens to a Vita, really your alternatives are to go under or to repurpose the space, which involves a lot of money because then you would be looking at another use. The other reason for the 8% is the heritage status, which we feel is something real, which adds additional risk to the property. So in terms of this particular property, this property had some issues to begin with, and they concerned the general condition of the outside of the property. Now, we have some estimates here, and this is just one chart here. We have the rest of the report in the appendix, but I'll briefly go over this. There were some short-term items, some medium-term items, and some long-term items. The short-term repairs added to about $296,000, which we included in our adjustment. Now, the reason for not amortizing that is because, well, these are short-term items. This would have been addressed in any purchase of this property, and any potential purchaser would have been looking at this in the short term, as opposed to something that could have been amortized over, say, a 5 or 10 year period. So we only looked at the $296,000. That is what we deducted from the capitalized income value. And that's what brought us down to $3,312,000. Now that is essentially what we are asking for in terms of the value, $3,312,000. In terms of the pictures and the appendix, I will go through this. So I've laid out the appendix according to what we have in it. The first few pages are pictures. Mr. Mercury has already gone over some of these. They're included in his brief as well. So you can have a look at those. The next section, which starts on page 25, it just shows comparison 1. If you turn over to the next page, you can see that is the first comparison. So we included the lease information of this property in it. We looked at the lease. We made sure that we were looking at a proper lease in order to include it. So this first one is CDI College. The second one is 213 Notre Dame.
Which page?
This is page 27.
Thank you.
So I also mentioned early on that saying that there are in the Exchange District in the areas where heritage properties exist, there are many properties that offer gross leases that have to be netted out, and this is what's been done with this one. So the gross lease is actually 2058, I believe. And we've netted it out to $11.34 per square foot. This is quite common. It's why I asked Mr. Cutler whether he verified all of his leases that were over the $20 range. Number 3 is 136 Marketplace. Again, we've included lease information. We've done it for number 4 as well. And then number 5, of course, is the last one, which was Robertson Career College. Again, we have our lease information in there. We think that $11.50 again is fair for this property, taking into account that only a portion of it has been renovated. Now, the next section over, we refer to the appendix. We have the sale brochure. So again, this is not post-reference date information. This came from January 2021. It says right there in nice bold letters, or not bold, but large letters. And this is page, I believe, yeah, maybe 31. I'm not sure if some of the numbers were actually, yeah, maybe 31. You're looking at an electronic file, so you can just see 31. Okay, so the first page is 276 Portage, talks about the property. The next page over gives you some information about the location, the investment highlights, the offering process. You can see that the offering sale price was $3,750,000. And then on the next page over, again, we have the offering price of $3,750,000. I will note that that is an offering price, not the sale price. Starting on page 34, we have the Crozier-Kilgore report. This is the full report of detailing all of the work that was done on the build, or all of the work that needs to be done on the building. And again, we are looking specifically at the short-term items, which we feel that any prudent purchaser would have looked at, as opposed to the remainder, which are medium and long-term items, which if we had included them, we probably would have amortized them. But again, this is only including the short-term items. So you can see from the report, pictures detailing the property. So on page 46, you can see cracks in the exterior. They're fairly significant, actually. On page 47, you also see them, and 48. As well as 49 and 50. Going on and on and on. Now, we noted that we included heritage status as one of those things that affects the capitalization rate. Because in our opinion, it actually increases the risk of, whoever owns these properties. Now, there are some funds available to them, but these costs are also quite high because you have to look at specific people that can repair these properties. It's not your average handyman that can go into one of these buildings and repair these structures. There are only, I believe, 1 or 2 firms in Winnipeg that actually deal with the issue of heritage properties. And on top of that, there's a process to it. So if we go over to page 63, this is the heritage permit process. There's a specific application process. Work has to be approved. And also the people who are doing the work have to be approved. So this is not like, again, making repairs to any old commercial building. There is a specific detailed process that involves applying through the city, having these repairs approved. And that doesn't come with most commercial properties. So through pages 65 and 66, again, we're looking at specifically the application process that's in place for heritage properties. Now, starting on page 67, we have the arguments to heritage properties. And you'll note that the adjustment on this property is not excessive. Because again, our Class C capitalization rate was 7.75. We did make a 25-point adjustment to 8%, but that is because of the adjustment that we have made on the non-recoverables. So you can see that in terms of heritage, there are risks and costs. And we can go over some of this. You can also read it on your own. But for example, here on page 67, about just a little past the halfway point of the page, from page 19 of Center Ventures 2017 business plan, many of the redevelopment opportunities in downtown Winnipeg involve historic buildings for which conversion requires unique knowledge and carries additional risks and costs. Next over, when the Winnipeg Clinic opposed their designation in 2017, Tugwell said council should instead offer grants that cover extra costs to maintain and renovate historic buildings. This is a theme throughout this presentation. I mean, there's more than 100 pages here. If I went through the entire 100 pages or so, we would be here till 2 o'clock. So I'm going to limit it and just note that with any type of heritage property, you're going to incur costs that you would not in a normal property, additional costs that are unforeseen, and that the city's compensation system for alleviating some of those issues usually doesn't suffice. So it is really up to the owner to fix these properties, maintain them at their costs. So many of the owners that have these properties sometimes own the property and they get onto a list and they oppose it. And you can see why they would want to oppose it. And we're not opposed to having heritage properties. As Mr. Story has said in our previous appeal, we believe in having a rich historical downtown that is kind of representative of this city and how it evolved over the years. That being said, these owners are not often being compensated for that process of, being able to maintain them and having the right funding in place to actually maintain them. And it is something that is imposed on them. Some of them buy these properties as is, knowing that they are heritage properties, but at the same time, there are additional costs to maintaining these properties that sometimes aren't really, there is no system for really funding them properly to the point where they can be adequately maintained. And so that is essentially why we make an adjustment on the capitalization rate, because it's not like an average property that doesn't have that status. You're not tied by anything in terms of what you can do to your building, how you can repair it, who can repair it. With a heritage property, not only are you getting a caveat in your title, but they're also telling you how you can repair it, who can repair it, and that does create some risk to you. So I would say to the board that we've made a minimal adjustment here, and we think that the 8% capitalization rate is fair.
Madam Chair, excuse me.
Yes, yes.
I'm gonna need a break if we could right now, please.
Okay, yes, if you do, we could take a brief recess, yes.
Please,
5
thank you.
5 minutes, yeah. Thank you. We'll call the meeting back to order, and Mr. Navarro, please continue with your presentation.
I believe I was about to say I'm ready for questions.
Okay. Okay. Well, then we broke at a very good time. Thank you very much. Mr. Kupfer, any questions for Mr. Navarro?
Just a few. I'm currently looking at I believe it's the Collier's January 2021 sale listing here. I think you've included, it gives a pretty good description of the property and some photos. I want to confirm the January 2021 date here. This would be prior to the approximate 1.1 million in renovation permits that would have been pulled after the sale in 2021, correct?
Yes, this is the listing from the events prior to any work being done.
Okay. So page 17, you list deferred capital in heritage buildings, and you mentioned the short term, the medium term, and the long term remediation. I think that was estimated for the building. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. So then the building did transact in 2021, and I wasn't able to see any of this work done on any of the permits that I reviewed. The exterior repairs to stucco or to terracotta, brick parapets. The permits that I saw were for interior renovations. It didn't appear like any of this work was actually done. Can you confirm if any of this work was completed?
I can't confirm, but again, what we would have said, what I said up on this is that any prudent purchaser would have taken those short-term items into account in their purchase price.
Okay, so you're not clear if the work was done, but the purchaser would have taken this work into account in their evaluation of their purchase price then?
No, what I'm saying is that most likely the purchaser would have taken those short-term items into account in their purchase price.
Okay. The statement is the prospective owner would incur these costs. So it's not that they've incurred the cost, it's that they've taken into consideration then?
Absolutely, and that's what we're trying to establish here is would it have affected the market value of the property? By including those short-term items, we're essentially stating that yes, these things would have been taken into account in the purchase price. So whether they've been completed or not is not really relevant at this point. What we're looking at is whether they would have played a part in the purchase price of the property. Now we're trying to establish a market value of this property. That is why we're also adjusting it, is because we're saying that any prudent purchaser would have considered those.
Okay, thank you. And then I just want to touch on the lease that was in place with the former owners. I don't believe you have this in your brief, presumably because former owners weren't a client of yours. But I have it on my page 16 there. I think we were in agreement that this was a gross lease, correct?
Yeah, as I mentioned several times, many of these older buildings have gross leases that are netted out. And those have to be specifically looked at because anytime you see a high lease value, the first question you should be asking yourself is whether this is a gross lease or whether this is a net lease.
And the netted out value provided by Terranet to the city, as of 2020 at least, was for $14.72 a foot for the entire space, 33,502 square feet, correct?
That is correct.
Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt, any questions for Mr. Navarro?
I thank you, Madam Chairperson. Mr. Navarro, the adjustment from the value, the adjustment is $296,000.
Correct.
And I think I just want to hear one more time why this was done.
So The $296,000 represents the short-term items that needed to be addressed in this property. Those are outlined in the appendix in the Crozier-Kilgore report. The short-term items are what we believe would have been considered in any transaction of this property. That is why we included them in the valuation in this case. We did not include the remainder of the items because those are more long-term items that can be amortized over time. But the reason is simply the short-term nature of these ones needed to be addressed relatively quickly and would have been considered in the purchase price of the property.
Mr. Navarro, I've never heard of a situation like this. Never.
Never?
Never. So is this something new that Altus is coming about?
No, I believe it has been included in valuations of that have been presented by Altus Group in the past, where we've made an adjustment for capital repairs that needed to be done.
I think these sort of adjustments are applicable to negotiation when a property is up for sale and there's a vendor and a purchaser and they negotiate, by going back and forth. So I don't know how this comes into play for an evaluation.
We think that
I'm a little mixed up here, unfortunately. Like I say, I've sat in a few hearings, and this item has not come up for me. But as you said, maybe in some of the other presentations that I've not attended, it is. So is this Altus position in regards to?
No, I think this was an alternative to making a further adjustment on the capitalization rate.
Yeah, but normally it would probably be reflected in the capitalization rate, either up or down.
Right. So if I would have included it in the capitalization rate, I probably would have made a further adjustment to 8%.
All right. The pictures of the necessary repairs, do you know whether they have been done, or do you know what? Can you give us a current sort of
I can't give you a status on it.
So we don't know how long these cracks have been there, or whether they are repairable or what.
Well, I think the report goes into saying that they can be repaired, but there is a cost to them. And that is why they need to have those costs.
Yeah. All right, Madam Chairperson, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clotrulio, do you have any questions for Mr. Navarro?
I think that Mr. Merritt had asked the question that I was kind of hoping to explore a bit. But you did, in fact, adjust your cap rate by 0.25%, as well as take the adjustment off your valuation. Ultimately, that's what you did.
How so? Can you just?
Well, you said that you've used 8% and it was a 0.25% increase to what you originally thought it would be.
Yeah. So,
but you've also did that in conjunction with the adjustment that Mr. Merritt was inquiring about.
So the adjustment for the, let's call them short-term items, haven't been reflected in the cap rate. Okay. What has been reflected in the cap rate is one, the Class C cap rate that we have. And if you looked at our capitalization rate report for Altus Group for 2023, capitalization rate that we had for Class C was 7.75. Okay,
Okay, what page is that, sir? Sorry,
that is page 17 of the cap rate report.
cap rate report, so. Moment. That's 17, you said, correct?
Yeah.
Just, just a moment, please, sorry. No, I've seen, no, I had a look, I looked at that.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
looking at the assessor's, cap rate, information from outside sources. Yeah, it seems that, Altus's view of the cap rates for this particular property are higher, by at least 3/4 of a point, it appears.
Yes, I mean, we're making a judgment call on this based on the information that we've supplied in the
Yeah.
capitalization rate.
Understood.
We're
All
at
right,
the cap
I
rate.
just wanted to,
Yeah.
to zero in on that, point for a
But
moment.
I just wanted to make it clear though, that the 25-point adjustment that we made was for heritage status, okay? That brought us up to 8%. So when I spoke to Mr. Merritt, I mentioned I've made no adjustment on the capitalization rate for those short-term items. Had I done that in the traditional way that these are done, where it's reflected in the cap rate, I would have had a cap rate higher than 8%.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Those are my questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. My questions were along both those lines, so I have nothing further. So Mr. Kupfer, summation.
I have no need for summation on this property. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro.
I do have a summation. This property needs to be looked at in its current form as a single occupant property. And in that sense, most of the comparisons that the assessor has provided in terms of rent, in our opinion, are not really relevant. There clearly has been, there are, through my rebuttal, establishment that some of those rents are not net but gross. And while we have no records on some of those rents have to be suspect, especially the ones that are over $20 per square foot for a Class C building in Winnipeg. If you know the AB market in Winnipeg, you would know that that is high. So any rent that is above $20 has to be looked at very carefully. That is what we try to establish by providing as much information as possible in our leases. We think that the two comparisons that we provided of two colleges, vocational colleges or schools, are the best comparisons, and they provide the most insight into what a potential tenant would pay for this type of space. So we think that our report, in terms of its thoroughness and information, provides a very good perspective as to the value of this property. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. We've heard all the items scheduled for this hearing, and so the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you all for your attendance and your attention.
Okay, thank you all. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.